manage our time as much as possible. So very interesting topic, agroecology for ACP countries is a critical aspect for sustainable agriculture and rural development. In the developments you received, there's a definition provided by FAO, and I take that opportunity to thank FAO colleagues who helped organizing this. It defines this as an integrated approach and that seeks to minimize interactions between vegetables and animals and humans, as well as the environment in their practices, and including the social aspect to ensure sustainable food systems and also fair systems. We have two panels in this program where we're going to look at various dimensions of agroecology and the impact on sustainable agricultural systems. We're going to demonstrate that there are innovative systems already implemented on the ground and which can be taken to scale. We'll try to understand the relevance of agroeconomy and agricultural choices and the impact on the management of natural resources and healthy eating. And we'll try to see how we can support household farms. I would like to thank the chairperson of ROPA. And we can build on existing local practices and innovative practices. We'll try to look at the impact of those changes for our consumption models, as well as the policies that we need to put into place in order to ensure a smooth food and agricultural transition. So this is the 59th Brussels briefing, last but one, on rural development. This has been in existence since 2007, run by DevCo at the European Commission, which works closely with other general directions. We have the cooperation of the ACP Secretariat and CTA. So we are here at ACP House, African, Caribbean, and Pacific Group of States Secretariat. We're always very welcome, to the point that people keep wanting to come back. So we'd like to thank the Secretary General and the Assistant Secretary General, Viano Onyasunu. Thank you for hosting us today. And I'll give you the floor now for a few introductory remarks. Thank you. Thank you very much, Isolina. And I'd like to thank all those who came this morning. I'll be brief because we started late, and as you said, we have to manage time with a very busy agenda. And we have specialists here on those issues that will give us more information on those issues. And I do apologize for arriving late, which caused the late start of this meeting. I'd like to thank CTA for initiating this event. We are always delighted to welcome you at ACP House. The European Commission and ourselves find this process particularly relevant. This process has gained scope over time, and it kept its relevance, and we are hoping that we can preserve it in other shapes or forms in the future. I'd like to highlight the theme of today's briefing, agroecology for sustainable food systems. About 4 or 5 years ago, this notion emerged. We didn't know whether it would still exist, or whether it wouldn't be something provided by countries of the north and imposed on countries of the south. And the definition that I like focuses on finding a way of putting science at the service of agricultural practices on the ground. And I think that's very telling. At the ACP level, we work closely with family farms, which we find are the most suitable to meet the challenges we face today. And the underlying issues of agroecology and family farming is the scaling up of those practices. We need to find sustainable models models that can, through which we can feed the close to 9 billion inhabitants we have, a number which will increase twofold in a few years. So that's the challenge. We are fully aware of the agricultural practices, and I'm sure the experts gathered here will highlight the challenges we face in implementing those practices and taking them to scale. Those who are active on the ground will tell us how they see things evolving and how to take those practices to scale. So that's the challenge. We are grateful that many have committed to this process, which creates a link between science, agricultural practices, and social movement, because at the end of the day, it's lifestyle that we try to promote through agroecology. So we are delighted to have you here, and we look forward to hearing more and seeing how we can provide you support in strengthening this approach. FAO has made it a central theme. There's even an information hub on the an information portal on the FAO website. So we are, of course, fully available to keep working with farmers' movements. I take the opportunity to thank the chairperson of ROPA, who's signed an agreement with the AU. And it's always good that we have organizations from the regional communities that stand alongside producers to help them go to scale. So once again, welcome to all, and we are looking forward to some lessons we can draw from these discussions. Thank you very much. I won't go through the biodata in detail, and I'll give the floor to Leonard Mitzi, who is the head of unit at DevCo C1, dealing with rural development, food security, nutrition, climate change, so a whole range of sectors, because we want to adopt a holistic and multi-sectoral approach. Thank you for being here, Mr. Mitzi. You have the floor.
Vanu, and I thank CTA for hosting under the ACP auspices today's event. When we were discussing what topic should we organize in the early part of 2020, given that the Brussels briefings are coming to an end, we said we have to choose a topic which, one, is linked as much as possible to the priorities of the new Commission. And clearly, after the unveiling of the Green Deal, I think this is a key topic which can contribute to the Green Deal, whether we speak about the European Union or our part of the developing world. But also, it's an important topic to discuss when we are at the end of a cycle of programming and we are in pre-programming stage, where, as you know, there is a big expectation in terms of the multi-annual financial framework, where 2020 is the key period of reflection at country level, regional level, of what we want to do in the new programming period starting in 2021. And when you discuss agroecology, for those who are a bit close to this business of agroecology, I think Isolina made reference to the concept. I will not enter into the definitional issues. This was quite a controversial topic during the agroecology symposium that was organized in FAO a few years ago. Although agroecology today is much more understood, it still, in some fora, creates uncertainty, tension, tension about definitions, about concepts, about what it entails, how it is scaled up. And even within the European Union, there are those who would be very much in favor, those who are more lukewarm to the concept. So even amongst member states, there could be those who are extremely open, and there are strong agroecology movements. I would just mention France would be probably amongst the most avant-garde, although now even countries like Germany are quite open to the concept, and others which are less. So I think the first important process is, within the European Union concept, is to scale this knowledge and to scale this know-how at member states level, also to keep up the momentum of the Green Deal. Now we have also within the Green Deal, specifically on agriculture, the farm to fork. So the first thing which has to be done also across the different services, and we are trying also to do it, because I was a bit involved in trying to find a common position across all the services, meaning DG Agri, DG Environment, JRC, RTD, to have a clear vision of the positioning of the European Commission services on agroecology. But most importantly today, I think what is important, and that's why we brought with CTA the key players on agroecology, is because I think we need also to use this momentum to identify how agroecology principles can actually be scaled up at country level. Because we can speak a lot about agroecology, but this has to be country driven. And when we do programming, it has also to be bought by ministers of agriculture, ministers of environment at country level. I still think that a lot can be done, more can be done within the African continent in particular, to actually put agroecology at the core of the continental agricultural policy process. We speak a lot about the CADEP process, but in the CADEP process you don't hear much about CADEP and agroecology. So one of the questions I think one needs to discuss is to what extent CADEP can actually embrace agroecology principles. We have, since 2017, built up a strong portfolio on agricultural research as Commission services, which is the development smart innovation through research and agriculture, which is the DASIRA program, which is part of the One Planet Summit contribution to the challenges around climate change. We started with the Sahel, we continued in the Horn, and now it's quite global. So I think it's also important that those who want to scale up at country, regional level, approach us, approach our delegations, in particular now that we will start in the coming months a programming phase at country level, so that when a country speaks about wanting to put a food systems transformation approach in its agenda, agroecology has a role in that transformation process. And I think that is important, and we would like not only to have good scalable cases, because there are a number of good scalable cases, but pragmatic approaches which are embedded precisely in policy making. Because if you are not having a clear policy approach at country level or a sub-regional level, then we can say whatever we want about how nice is the agroecology process. It has also to be done in a holistic way, where through our support also to farmers' organizations, and ROPA is one of them, through a support process to a social movement approach, but also quite a seismic shift in how we handle food systems beyond the silo approach of looking in a fragmented approach. This could be the way forward. We also have the forest communication and the council conclusions of the end of December, which can give us an impulse also on, in particular, agroforestry. This, we are trying to do it also in a value chain approach, because agroecology, just for the sake of being, I wouldn't say in a romantic mode, it has also to be in a livelihoods mode. So if we speak about agroforestry or an agroecology approach in a cocoa value chain, and this is an area which is close to the ACP, given that there is a strong, robust commodities program, it is important that we look into the modalities of how we can roll out this approach at a value chain approach starting, for example, with cocoa, looking not only at the deforestation concept and aspects, but also into the human rights dimension and into the living incomes and living wages approach. So that gives a bit of a more innovative way of how we do policy making. Another piece which clearly needs to include the agroecology approach is the EU-Africa communication, which is now in design stage. And as you know, there will be a summit later on at the end of this year. It's important, and the services will try to push this concept, but it's also important that the member states and the European Parliament also engage. And the first indications of the Parliament, especially of the new Parliament, and we have set up with the FAO the new Parliamentary Alliance Against Hunger, this topic is clearly going to feature high in this cross-party, cross-committee parliamentary, it's an informal setup, and we have strong appetite from a number of MEPs. So it's also important that you approach the MEPs who are close to this concept, so that in the deliberations when we discuss either follow-up to the forestry communication and council conclusions, or the EU-Africa communication, or the Green Deal, this aspect is also embedded. Last but not least, so that I don't elaborate more, is the Food System Summit. You know that in 2021, the United Nations will convene a Food System Summit. It's not clear yet whether it's in Rome or in New York, but this is relatively relevant. Most probably it will be in New York. I think we need to put this agroecology approach as a strong component, and in the coming days already in the context of the Grüne Woche, which starts tomorrow, there will be discussions also in close collaboration with the German presidency. The German presidency will organize, before they convene the presidency, a high-level SDG2 conference in Berlin on the 5th and the 8th of June. And there is a strong appetite from a number of quarters to actually put this approach as a key component of the SDG2 delivery mode. So, however, this requires, as I said earlier on, a number of push factors from a number of member states. So the interinstitutional aspect from the Commission services, the Parliament, and the member states should actually push this, so that in the run-up between the German presidency in 2020, with all the adoptions of the processes from the Green Deal to the EU-Africa communication, the EU Summit, we reach the Food System Summit with an approach which is truly transformational, which is truly systemic, and I think that today's deliberations can feed into this process, so that at country level we can also then program better and scale up our programming, so that this becomes mainstreamed and not just the niche of programming as it was until now. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mizzi, for your words. So without any more delay, I give the floor to Émile Frison, who has said join us as a co-organizer. In addition, as I mentioned at the beginning, on the core organizers, we also have additional ones specialized on topics, and Émile is one on agroecology. He's a member of the panel, international panel of experts on sustainable food systems. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you also for the work of yourself and your colleagues in organizing this event.
Thank you, Isolina. Thank you for really making this happen here at very short notice. IPES-FOOD is an international panel of experts operating as a think tank on the issue of sustainable food systems. It was established in 2015 and is operating as an independent panel that is really trying to advance and bring the issue of sustainable food systems to the attention of decision makers. I mean, for many years now, at the level of heads of states, people are talking about climate change, but the issue of food systems and its sustainability was not yet. It is getting there now, and I think that is very encouraging. The first substantial report that was produced by IPES-FOOD was called From Uniformity to Diversity, a paradigm shift from industrial agriculture to sustainable, diversified agroecological systems. And this, I think, has helped bringing this issue on the table. Of course, a lot of things have happened since. You mentioned already the Agroecology Symposium. FAO started in 2014, but the second symposium, I think, was a very big step in the direction of putting agroecology really on the radar screen. Not as a very marginal thing, but as a way forward for the future. We've seen recently at the CFS the presentation and the discussion of the report of the high-level panel of experts that was chaired by Fergus Sinclair, and that clearly demonstrate the potential of agroecology. And I think we've moved beyond whether this is just one small thing, or I think there is really a consensus emerging now. And a lot of the surroundings of the discussions have evolved very rapidly just in the last 1 year. If you look at a number of reports that I will mention in my presentation later on, it's really very clear that, first of all, we need transformational change in our systems. Just trying to make our current model of agriculture a little bit more efficient, a little bit less damaging to the environment is not going to do the trick. We really need to rethink our model and change the paradigm. And I think the environment has now turned around. Leonard mentioned the Green Deal in Europe that is really providing an opportunity to rethink more in depth. At the UN level, nature-based solutions regarding climate change is really opening the door to look at what agriculture can contribute in a sustainable way. So a lot of things have been changing very rapidly in the last year. We must take this opportunity to make a big step forward. Mr. Glasunou mentioned agroecology maybe was perceived earlier on as something coming from the north. I would say it's exactly the opposite now. A lot of the very practical, successful examples are coming from the south. It is really farmers' organizations in Africa, in other ACP countries that are showing the way and that we should be listening to. And I'm very pleased that in the second panel, we will hear some very concrete examples of what is happening there. And I think what is also important, and I think that's something that the Commission can also support, is really giving greater voice to farmers' organizations that are demanding to move in that direction and to convince their governments that may be still often influenced by vested interest that want to maintain the current system in place. So I will not say more now, as I will have the opportunity to talk more in the next session. But I really am very pleased that we are here today at the beginning of 2020. That will be a key year to get this really on the agenda in a firm way, as Leonardo already mentioned. So thank you for organizing this together with us, and I'm very pleased to see the audience here around this very important topic. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Émile. Et donc, le dernier intervenant.
I thank you very much, Emile. Our very last speaker would be the director of the CTA since 2010, Michael Hailo, and who before worked in various international centers. The CTA is based in Wageningen in the Netherlands. I thank you, Mr. Hailo.
Thank you very much, Isolina. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Well, I'm really happy to see a few of my old colleagues from the CGIR, Emile Frison and Fergus Sinclair, and the other speakers as well. Well, we have heard a lot already in terms of the importance of agroecology to food systems transformation and many of the challenges that we are facing today. So I'm not going to spend much time repeating that. Obviously, the interest from our perspective, in organizing the briefings and is really to facilitate knowledge exchange and to look at what's the state of the art in any of these topics. And I think it's really timely from what Leonard laid out, that the importance of agroecology is becoming quite critical as we face many of the challenges that we have today in terms of climate change and so on. And for us, the important thing is how do we bring out perspectives from different stakeholders and put it on the policy agenda. So over the years, through the briefings as well as through other interventions, CTA has been really supporting the voice of farmers' organizations, the voice of youth, the voice of other stakeholders, the private sector and so on, to come together with policymakers to be able to, share their perspectives. So I think the value of this kind of forum is to see what do we have in terms of knowledge, in terms of research, what are the developments and so on, and in terms of the policy and the practice where we are, to bring those together and come up with hopefully some action points that could help to advance the topic of agroecology. I think the challenge for us is there are different perspectives of how countries look at the value of agriculture food systems. From the perspective of the African, Caribbean, Pacific, and other developing countries, it's really very much on maximizing food, agricultural productivity, creating employment, jobs, and so on. So how are you going to reconcile this kind of priorities with, the ecological and, the climate challenges that we face and, that agriculture and food systems can contribute to? So these are really quite diverse perspectives. I think Leonard talked about the CADE process, where, the idea is to bring, the priorities of governments and donor and development partners to be able to bring about agricultural transformation at scale. When we bring new perspectives like agroecology, which are not mainstreamed, how do you reconcile the needs of the governments and so on in terms of food production and the environmental challenges that we are facing? So one has to look at what would be the right policy forum to bring out these kind of issues and to be able to really take action, that's concrete. Because one of the challenges we face when we talk about agroecology is if farmers are trying to transfer into that system, there are risks that are not really supported by governments. And most of the investments are going to traditional subsidy programs and so on. And even extension systems are not addressing this kind of challenges. So how do we make sure that some of these issues are integrated into the research extension system? The necessary support structure exists for countries to be able to support this kind of innovations and integrating the traditional knowledge as well. So from our CTS perspective, we have done a lot of work around the knowledge agenda, being a knowledge institution. We have done a lot of work in terms of capturing traditional knowledge practices, including agroecology practices, that contribute, especially in terms of climate change adaptation, and which we have documented a lot of those practices in our different publications and so on. We also facilitate a lot of South-South exchange. So you'll find a rich resource of information and knowledge in our databases, which we hope to be able to preserve and continue to make available in the future as well. So with those words, I look forward to the discussions, and I hope we have a lively interaction and hopefully come up with some concrete action points that would be useful for policy and practice. So thank you and have a good briefing this morning.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Aylou. Donc, sans plus tarder.
I thank you very much, Mr. Halo. Without further ado, let's go to the first panel. I must say that I would like to thank you all for your presence. We have 160 registered participants, but we also have online participants. Given that the briefing is web streamed, you can also ask questions and send in your comments. And please note that the videos of this briefing is going to be put online. And if you miss anything, please don't worry. You'll find everything online, as well as all your PowerPoint communications and resources that our partners shared with us. Everything will be online. Thank you very much, Emile, once again, for the very first communication that's going to set the tune on the topic, on what we know on research in agroecology.
Thank you. Thank you, Isolina. I will be giving a more general presentation about the potential of agroecology to achieve the SDGs and also meeting the Paris climate targets. A lot of this is based also on the report that I mentioned earlier that was published in 2016, From Uniformity to Diversity, that really looks at the multiple dimensions in which agroecology can bring about the transformational change that is necessary. I'm not going to dwell on the problems. I think we are all familiar with the triple burden of malnutrition, the impact on our health from the current system, environmental unsustainability, the social inequities that are linked to our agricultural and food systems, and also the neglect of cultural values in many cases. So these are all directly linked to a still currently dominant model of agriculture that is being proposed as the way forward, which we called industrial or conventional agriculture, based on high external inputs and simplification of the system. And so that's what needs to be really transformed in depth. What is encouraging is that just in the last 1 year, we have a number of reports: the IPBES report on land degradation, the TEEB for agriculture and food report, the IPBES report on biodiversity, the high-level panel of expert report on agroecology and other innovations, the IDRI report on agroecology in Europe, the IPCC report on climate change and land, the Global Sustainable Development Report 2019, and I did also want to mention the Global Climate Adaptation Report that also came out in 2019. These are all very strongly aiming at requiring transformational change. I think the time where we think that tweaking the current system can do the trick is over. There is now really consensus on the fact that we need a transformational change. There is still discussion about some of the, I would say some of the wording, not even of the concepts, but some of the wording around what should be done. But we know which is the direction, and what we need really is that transformational change to move, whether we start from an insufficiently productive subsistence agriculture that needs to be improved, or from unsustainable industrial agriculture, we need to move towards sustainable, diversified agroecological farming. That requires really this different paradigm, a different way of thinking about the way we produce food, in order to deliver on economic, environmental, health, social and cultural aspects at the same time, and not just favoring the economic or yield aspect of productivity aspect at the expense of the other dimensions. And agroecology is not just a set of agricultural practices, as was mentioned earlier, but it's about changing the social relations, about empowering farmers, adding value locally, privileging short value chains, etc. It's really rethinking the way we approach agriculture. There's been still people that say, well, we need more evidence about the potential of agroecology to feed future populations. And I think that also we have passed that stage. I think there is enough evidence now that if we really apply the best knowledge and combine the best science with traditional knowledge of farmers, that we can achieve the kind of productivity that is needed to feed the population. Virtually all the experiences that we have on the ground show that you can get a better income by applying agroecology compared to other conventional systems. And especially, which is very important for poor smallholder farmers, and also especially with the climate challenges that are facing us, that we have a greatly increased resilience and stability of the production system through applying agroecology. So I think we should really consider agroecology as a way to get out of poverty, despite what some voices still try to get. I'm not going to bombard you with figures. There is a lot of information available in the IPES-FOOD report and in many more recent publications. But if you compare where productivity needs to be increased, and that is in the developing countries where population increases are going to be the largest, if you compare the current practices with the potential of agroecology, there is a real potential to double the productivity. And also the notion of the importance of diversity, not only in providing the resilience, but also increasing the productivity, is showing a great potential. Some economic figures have been lacking until recently. We have a publication from just a few months old from Europe that is showing that from an economic point of view, the performance of agroecological systems is between 15 and 110% better compared to conventional agriculture. So the idea that we need to prove the potential is really beyond us. It's really people, I would say, with bad faith that are still questioning this potential. From an environmental point of view, the potential of agroecological system is really also equally important because it's a way to put carbon in the soil instead of having agriculture as one of the greatest contributors to greenhouse gas production. It's the possibility to boost biodiversity, to restore degraded land. We have 25% of the agricultural land globally that is deteriorated, and that can be restored by applying agroecology. And also improving the ecosystem services in terms of water and nutrient cycling, pollination, pest and disease management. So, for example, a quote from the IPCC report is that increasing the resilience of the food system through agroecology and diversification is an effective way to achieve climate change adaptation, and that this is agreed as based on robust evidence and high agreement. From a nutritional point of view, IPES-FOOD produced another report on the impact of our current food system on health. And when you look at the figures that are quoted in that study, it's showing that we are talking about trillions of dollars a year at the global level as a negative impact of our current food system. If a fraction of that was invested in preventing unhealthy food systems, we would be making a tremendous way forward. So through agroecology, we can avoid the negative outcomes of the use of pesticide, antibiotics, nitrates in water. It provides for diverse, healthy diets, but also it's been shown that increased levels of beneficial nutrients such as omega-3 fatty acids or antioxidants such as polyphenols are present in food produced through agroecology. And finally, from a social point of view, this is a way to provide quality, better and more employment. A lot of the question of employment in developing countries is a crucial one, and we cannot just expect to have only 2 or 3% of the population involved in agriculture when currently it is 60 to 70%. Because there's no capacity to absorb that force. So we have to provide livelihoods in agriculture in rural areas, and agroecology can contribute to that in a significant way. Also, by diversifying, it provides opportunities for employment throughout the year and avoiding the socially often unacceptable conditions related to seasonal employment, but also to make and re-establish closer links between consumers and producers by having shorter value chain and re-establishing the social links between farmers and consumers. And finally, from a cultural point of view, bringing back a lot of the traditional crops that are culturally important, but also that are adapted to the local conditions from an environmental point of view, and the capacity to integrate traditional knowledge are very important. So this is a way not only to contribute to the Sustainable Development Goal 2 about zero hunger, but actually to 13, it's contributing to 13 of the 17 development goals directly. And actually, if you look at it in a holistic way, it's to all of them. So we must really look forward to mainstream this, but there are also obstacles. And in our report of 2016, we identified 8 what we call lock-ins that are making it difficult to have this transition. Now that we have the evidence of the potential, the question can be, why is it that we don't see a much more rapid transition in this direction? Well, there are a number of obstacles. I don't have the time here to go through each of them, but I just want to highlight a few. One is about measures of success, and I'll come back to that in a second, and the other one about concentration of power on who is influencing policies. On that point, if we see that today just a few companies are controlling the majority of the market in terms of seed, commercial seeds, fertilizers, agrochemicals, R&D in poultry or pigs, the global grain trade, this is giving a tremendous power to these companies to influence policies. And that has to be, it has been long an elephant in the room, and that has to be recognized, and I think starts to be recognized more today. And if you look at the retail or transformation sector, if you go to a supermarket, you see a huge range of different colorful labels, but if you look at the companies behind it, it's also a very small number of companies that control that. And the combination of the input suppliers and the people on the recipient side, or the downstream side, that is engaged in a lot of highly transformed food, they have an interest in maintaining cheap, large bulk production of cheap commodities that are not really delivering on the health or social side, but provide the inputs for that kind of industry to continue. If we want to bring about change, we need to tackle each of these lock-ins and do it in an integrated way. Again, I don't have time to go into detail. I encourage you to read our report. But one aspect that I want to highlight here is the fact that we should really be changing how we measure success. By just focusing on yield per hectare or productivity per worker or gross income, or at the national level, GDP growth, we are not really measuring what matters to society. We should be looking at the quality of the food, the nutrient content, and its availability to the people that need it, the total outputs, not just productivity of one particular commodity, resource efficiency, the ecosystem services that are delivered by the production system, and the livelihood resilience and social equity that is characterizing the production system. Now, as I mentioned in my introductory remarks, a lot of things are happening, and a lot of things are happening in the South. Transition is underway and needs to be supported. And we must realize that we need to change not only the production practices, but also change the social and economic relations and empowering the people that need to be changed. To change the changes in knowledge generation and transformation and transmission, and changes also in the institutional frameworks. And we have also, IPES-FOOD published a recent report about case studies that show what can be done at a farm level, at a community level, at a regional level, and at the national level. So, in summary, whether we start from underperforming subsistence agriculture or from unsustainable industrial agriculture, we need to converge towards sustainable, diversified agroecological farming. And what we should really prevent is transformation of underperforming subsistence agriculture in unsustainable industrial agriculture. And that is still happening too much. With that, I thank you for your attention, and I will be making a short second presentation about a recent initiative of the European Commission, which has identified 5 key areas where they see a necessity to make a breakthrough. And I want to talk more particularly about a mission board for soil health and food, because it's very relevant to the discussion here today. I have been appointed as a member of the mission board on soil health and food. This is a way to really give a strong visibility and impact on society and policy making through science and technology in 5 different areas. And it aims to achieve a bold, inspirational and measurable goal that could not be achieved through individual actions, and really find solutions to the major challenges. The 5 areas that have been selected at the European Union level are climate, healthy oceans and water, cancer, climate-smart cities, and soil health and food. And I'll say a few words about this. So for each of these areas, a mission board has been established, and I think the ignorance of the wider public about the importance of soil health is some mind-boggling, I would say, and was already recognized by Da Vinci about 400 years ago. So what is involved here? It's a collaboration between many European Commission services. For each of these areas, a mission board of 15 members has been established. It's supported also by a wider group that is called the Mission Assembly, but there will also be stakeholder and citizen engagement processes to really get broad input into these areas by society. And the question is, why have a mission on soil health and food? This has been recognized as really providing the need to show how soil is providing vital functions and public goods, that this is a scarce and non-renewable resource. You can't just create, in the short term, create soil. It takes a very long time to create soil. We are having fragile ecosystems that are threatened by our current practices, and this is something that is at the center of major societal challenges of food security, food safety, loss of biodiversity, climate mitigation, etc. And so it requires solutions that take a systems approach, and that's why in the mission board different expertises are brought together to guide the process in this area. And so the ambition is really to have healthy soils for healthy people and a healthy planet. This is looking at land soil management because it's relevant to major policy objectives in terms of food and nutrition security, climate change mitigation, protection of biodiversity, reduction of pollution, but also to provide vibrant rural areas. These are the members. The mission board is chaired by the former Dutch Minister of Agriculture, Kees Veerman, the agenda is quite ambitious. It started only in September of 2019. We are having monthly meetings and have the ambition in the next few months to really do a lot in terms of citizen engagement, to get broad inputs and getting also a better understanding of the need to have transformational change in this area. And I think the discussions we will be having here today about agroecology and its contribution is extremely relevant to this area, and that has already been recognized by the mission board. So I already mentioned the citizen engagement, and I think I'll leave it at that for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that presentation. So we give the floor now to Ronnie Brathwaite. I mean, we have been speaking a lot about scaling up. We have been speaking a lot about the UN and FAO as well, work on agroecology. So Ronnie is leading that team at FAO, so we are very pleased that he made that presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Isolina, and good morning. Since we started many years ago with the Green Revolution, we have seen a disaggregation of the agricultural sector and the food systems. And what we have today is a system that benefits a few large companies, as Emile had said before, and is being recognized now that these systems are unsustainable. In order to reach the SDGs as our SDG targets, we must therefore put these pieces of the disaggregated system back together. And a transformation to a new and excuse me, more sustainable approach to agriculture and food systems. One that gives multiple benefits to the stakeholders, one that gives multiple benefits to the environment. What we see with agroecology is this presents to us a more holistic view of agriculture, and it ensures that the components of the food system and the various actors are considered. The Scaling Up initiative, as launched by FAO, this did not come to fruition in an easy manner. It started back in 2014, as was stated earlier, and the launch of the Scaling Up Agroecology initiative was really the beginning of the process and a call to action. The proclamations and resolutions that were made, there's no need for a backing by international organizations, a re-education of practitioners within agriculture, and even within the UN system, the members of the organization that work on behalf of member countries need to re-educate themselves as to how to better provide services to countries. Unfortunately, we still continue to promote in some fora these unsustainable practices in the agriculture sector. Even many of the projects that we have
developed over the years, we've now recognized that we were somewhat on the wrong path, so to speak. At the same time, we are launching the Scaling Up initiative. We have national, regional, and national agriculture programs that have been initiated in Mexico, India, Senegal. These are our priority countries, but we still have a lot more requests from other countries to assist them in transitioning to a more sustainable type of agriculture. This has motivated us to even press further in our initiatives for advocacy and providing information. Our main areas of focus really for the Scaling Up Agroecology initiative are knowledge and innovation, policy processes, assisting countries and even regional governing bodies on how to better design and implement policies that support sustainable agriculture. And we also have to build stronger connections and build stronger networks. We advocate for a bottom-up approach, and in order for us to have farmers be empowered, they need to speak to each other. Working as individual farms is not part of the agricultural approach. We need communities in order to produce food for the community. The focus areas of the Scaling Up Agroecology initiative are in line with the 2030 agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. Finding innovative solutions to combat poverty, malnutrition, even the harmful effects that the current agricultural practices have on the environment. Agroecology has solutions for these. We have to refocus on the actors within the food and agriculture systems and how people are impacted, how their livelihoods are impacted by the current system. We also look at enabling countries to achieve several SDGs. We look at agriculture as the foundation for rural development and development of developing countries. Yes, there are other industries that have taken a priority in many countries, but agriculture provides food, which is essential for everybody. If we don't have proper nutrition, if we don't have healthy people, then the other industries really cannot assist us. In order for us to assist countries in creating this new approach to agriculture, the FAO came up with the 10 elements of agroecology. We heard a definition of agroecology early on that was provided by FAO, but for many years we had resisted providing this definition. Because it's such a dynamic approach, the agroecology approach is so dynamic, we decided that we needed to give flexibility to any system that is being designed by countries. And we brought forward these 10 elements. And while these elements characterize the agroecology approaches, they describe the key components of the systems which countries can use in order to design their new policies, to address issues of empowerment of persons that are vulnerable, women, youth. Those are the two groups which we in FAO have focused on. We also have the concept of circular economy, where for many of the stakeholders, the current system of agriculture, we use and dispose. I think this is a system where there's not only in the agricultural sector, but generally in the livelihoods of people, in people's everyday lives, there's this these one-use materials that essentially is unsustainable. What needs to happen for agroecology to emerge? For international organizations, donors, for governments, we need responsible governance. This is one of the 10 elements of agroecology. And although we acknowledge the need for a transformation of the food system, it has to be a holistic approach, and it has to be an approach that everybody has to adopt. We need coherent and consistent policy frameworks. We also need to boost investment and incentives for agroecological transitions. We have a lot of funding being put behind conventional agriculture. There's not this type of backing for agroecological solutions. We have, in many instances in the countries that we're working with, in Andhra Pradesh and India, we've produced videos of solutions that farmers have created within their communities on combating some of the major problems that are faced by the agriculture sector. But these have not been promoted as much as the other types of technologies that are pushed by big companies. So we need the support. We need the support of these, of donors, of governments, and development partners in order to get funding and support for small-scale innovations. We also need to work together in order to find these solutions. Yes, I mentioned just now that there are some innovative ideas that have come to the fore, but the community of practice, the scientists, those who are in the forefront of developing technologies have not yet embraced the solutions that have been put forward by the smaller actors, if you can say that. We need to build a context-specific curriculum for our agroecology. We cannot continue to promote the furrow of higher education and the types of agriculture that are unsustainable. We also need to promote horizontal learning, innovative platforms among farmers and researchers. I came across one of it was an online forum for young farmers in Africa. I was disheartened by the fact that when a question came about how do I solve this pest problem, the only solutions that came forward from the peers of this farmer were chemicals. There was a long list of chemicals. Yes, this works. Yes, you can buy it in this place. They had all the information about these chemical solutions, but there were no biological solutions that were put forward. We also need to look at circular and solidarity economy. Ensure that infrastructure for local agroecological systems are in place. Use public purchase power. This is very strong in some countries that support small farmers. The government makes sure that if they're purchasing, they purchase from producers of agroecological goods. And I have one example of a system which had good intentions but didn't work. We had organic and agroecological products that were produced by farmers. They obviously fetch a better price, but one policy which thwarted these efforts was the fact that there was a public procurement system where these products were consolidated with conventionally produced products, which essentially eroded any of the financial benefits to these organic or agroecological farmers. So we need to look at the types of policies we put in place so that farmers are supported. We also need to build better markets, recognize that there's a diversified production from ecological farms, so that there is a market or an avenue for varied types of commodities, not just monoculture commodities in bulk purchasing. What is FAO doing? I'll just highlight a few of them because I'm short on time. But we are coordinating actions with UN agencies on the global agenda for promoting agroecology for meeting the Sustainable Development Goals. This is one of the core elements of our work in scaling up agroecology initiative. We're also facilitating participatory policy dialogues for more cohesive policy that support agroecological production. It's not an easy process having dialogue with policymakers, as many of you would know. There's always an element of misunderstanding or mistrust of something new, which we understand is part of the process. But even after some evidence is put forward, there's always a question, okay, yes, this works for you, but will it work for me? This needs to be thrashed out, yes, in the policy process. But I think countries need to be more accepting of these changes after many examples are given that the current system doesn't work. So FAO is working with countries in order to get over the hurdles of if we change, what's going to happen next. We continue to advocate for increased investment and partnerships in agroecology. And we continue to support countries in achieving their SDGs, but this is not only through agricultural production, because agroecology is more holistic than this. We also attack issues of poverty, nutrition, social support. These are the core principles of agroecology. I'm here for the questions and discussions after, so thank you very much and look forward to more dialogue.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. We will have an opportunity for questions a little bit later. We still have two speakers, including Dr. Ferguson Sinclair, a main researcher at ICRAF. This is the Agroforestry Center based in Kenya. And he is heading up the service that deals with forest, trees, and agroforestry. Thank you very much for being here.
Okay, thank you very much. I've only got 10 minutes, so I'm going to say 5 things, 5 slides, and 5 key things I want to address. Principles, transition, agency, metrics, and scaling. And what I'm going to say is based on 2 reports that Emile has already mentioned. The HLPE report on agroecology and other innovations, which was a hugely consultative process. So it had 10 authors on the project team, chosen for their diversity geographically and in terms of discipline. We had to get the report through a steering committee of 15 other people with divergent views. And the whole process goes through various levels of consultation with over 250 detailed submissions, including some from 15 or 20 academics who'd really wrote as much as we'd written in the V0 draft. So it's a hugely consultative and emergent document, which, as Emile has already said, is shifting the where agroecology is in relation to international processes and agricultural innovation internationally. Okay. Is this working? Yes. I'm trying to get down.
Oops. Somebody put, because that's not our computer actually. Oops. Sorry, it should work. It was working. Can you call somebody? Sorry. Yeah, you can use this one instead. Okay. This one. Sorry, put back on the. Sorry, it's not our computer.
Okay, that's fine.
This one. Yeah. Yes, perfect.
And I'm sure you can all read that very clearly, so it was really worth the worth the struggle. But you can go to the reports, they're all available online, and you can get the detail. What's important here are generic principles that are locally applied. And this gets round the sort of definitional problem that we quite often have in agroecology, and the fact that you end up with very diverse practices being locally interpreted to suit local conditions. So we're moving away from a one-size-fits-all type of thinking and towards locally adaptive solutions that are a co-creation of science and local people, which of course are not mutually exclusive categories. So these principles, which come from the agroecological literature, they're a consolidation, have emerged bottom up. They're not just something that's imposed top down, because the agroecology science has been a participatory science right from the word go. And what these principles do is they bring agriculture in harmony with nature. They are focusing on regenerative rather than degradative forms of agriculture. So livelihoods and the well-being of people are right at the center, which is what agriculture is doing, but trying to do it in a way that protects rather than destroys the environment upon which that agriculture is based. And it's not at all surprising that you need a change from a dominant agricultural model which has emerged to optimize where externalities have not been taken into account. So the industrial agricultural model works with the current way that we value things, with the current economic system that pervades. And it's only through broad stream changes in the environment that agriculture operates that practices will be able to develop to be in line with planetary as well as with human health. So these principles can be seen as operating in relation to a transition. So we've got things like biodiversity, input reduction, soil health, animal health, recycling, and the management of all those things, the interactions amongst them through synergy and economic diversification, all at the sort of agroecosystem level. And these lead to incremental change in terms of the way in which agriculture is practiced. We then have a series of more social, economic and governance aspects related to social values and diets, fairness, participation, land and natural resource governance, and the connectivity of producers and consumers that are much more to do with changing, transformational change of the whole food system. And this is where agency becomes particularly important. And by agency here, we're referring to the extent to which people are involved, can participate, can make decisions about what they eat, how what they eat is produced, how it's processed, transported, and sold. So it's a whole coupled social ecological system approach. And one of the recommendations, and you've got the recommendations in your folders of the HLPE report, one of those recommendations is that agency should be a fifth pillar of food security and nutrition because of its importance in democratizing food systems and making people more empowered in the decisions about what happens right along. It's not just a food chain, it's food webs because they're really interconnected in terms of what happens. So co-creation of knowledge sits at the center of all of these other 12 principles. And there is a relationship, there's an entire complementarity between these principles and the 10 elements from FAO that Ronnie mentioned earlier. It's just that these principles are more precisely articulated to be able to guide decision making. And of course, coming from ICRAF, you would expect that stressing trees is an important aspect, because the more functional diversity that you have in the system, the more opportunity there is for that diversity, for niche diversification, a higher net primary productivity, because you've got different ability to capture resources. Now, bringing about change is complex, because we've got both public sector governance and private sector governance. And I think it's important to stress both of these happening and influencing things at a range of different scales. From the field, where agroecological practices will actually happen, where a farmer makes a decision to do something or not, then the farm scale integration into the livelihood. Most small-scale farmers are not just farmers. Their livelihoods are much more complex, and the total factor productivity of their livelihood is what is going to matter to them, not just the agricultural elements of it. When we get up to a landscape scale, then there are multiple ecosystem services, water quality, pollination, all sorts of things going on that matter in that landscape. And unless we have metrics that take on board the trade-offs and synergies amongst those ecosystem services to get holistic evaluation of our agricultural performance, we can't make rational decisions, and we can't value or put in place appropriate governance mechanisms to get the type of agriculture that is required. And then finally, when we look at the whole food system, we're looking at everything from production through to consumption. And what people eat is as important in terms of driving agriculture as how it's produced. And there we need some sort of notion of ecological footprint as a metric, which has both sides of that equation. The what is being produced on the one hand, and what the implication of that method of production is on the environment. Now, the problem with ecological footprint at the present time is it doesn't take into account whether agriculture is regenerative or degradative. So we need global statistics that allow us to bring that into ecological footprint if it's going to be instrumental in driving decisions. So we can summarize some of the key aspects around what needs to happen if we're going to scale up agroecology. Because at the moment, and let us be quite clear, decisions to favour agroecology right across those scales, from the field to the policymaker, are constrained by the way that things are currently structured. What needs to change? Number one, we need to create a level playing field. There are three key aspects to this: addressing market failures, and it really is significant. There is a market failure about soil carbon. We know it's hugely important for sustaining agriculture, and yet it has no economic value in an immediate case. So people's decision to produce something and reduce carbon levels is economically rational in the short term, but of course it isn't rational in the long term. Unless we can bring these market failures under control, then there's going to be problems. And there are three aspects to that: enabling consumer choice so that people can choose, this is the agency aspect, sustainable agricultural products; encourage public and private sector market interventions to improve what is valued within the system, and not to pay for unsustainability; and to develop and apply holistic performance metrics that I've just mentioned. We need to reform maladapted practices. Fertilizer subsidies, many other things are skewing our current agricultural system in favour of unsustainable models. If you subsidize inorganic fertilizer, then you make the decision to use biological nitrogen fixation less economically viable. So maladapted practices, including a lot of forest legislation that makes it difficult for farmers to benefit from trees integrated in their farm systems. There's a whole range of policies that are problematic. Thirdly, improving the evidence base. Well, I would agree with Emile that there is sufficient evidence for us to be taking agroecology forward. There is a pitifully small amount of evidence on the comparative performance of agroecological practices versus alternatives across the range of contexts that we need. And we need the same sort of level of investment in research to generate that evidence that has gone into the industrial model. And we're talking about 1, 2 to 5% of resources. I think the latest from FAO was about 5% of the FAO budget was going to agroecology as opposed to alternatives. When the playing field is not level, it's exceedingly difficult for rational decisions to be made. The other two aspects we need to focus on are embracing complexity and enabling integration. In terms of complexity, we need to address options by context interactions rather than looking for these universal type solutions. And there was a very interesting issue of experimental agriculture that came out last year that really had a lot of papers looking in detail at how to operationalize options by context work. That fits very much together with this co-learning and horizontal knowledge exchange amongst farmers. So a complete reconfiguration of our idea of what research is and what the power asymmetries are in relation to established science versus local knowledge. There is then, very connected to this, connecting up social movements and science. Many of you may know about zero-budget natural farming in India. Hugely controversial because many established scientists are antagonistic to a social movement that is trying to make something happen differently. What we need, of course, is to try to connect these things up so that we get a better scientific basis for some of the agroecological movements, and the ability of movements to spread agroecology very quickly, much faster than science generally spreads, is something that scientists can learn from by trying to understand what is happening in those social movements, how are they making people change and change quickly and sustainably. And finally, there is a real need for integration, and this is a tricky one because we've known this for a long time, and it's not that people don't have a wish to do these things, it's a question of how do you implement them. So we've got problems of horizontal integration across sectors. Water, energy, agriculture, environment, they're often different ministries. It's often really difficult to get genuinely integrated policy that cuts across. And finally, we've got this real need to integrate across scales. And this is really practically important because there's virtually no policy processes that happen at the local landscape scale at which most ecosystem services are manifest. If you haven't got the structures, if you haven't got the social capital at the appropriate scale, you simply can't implement things, regardless of whether you've got a national commitment, regardless of whether you've got a lot of people wanting something to happen. So there's a real lot of detailed work that needs to be done in operationalizing territorial type approaches that actually work at the scales that are required. If these things are done, and I think the movement that there now is towards looking at how we're approaching agriculture as being critical for a climate change emergency, critical in relation to human and planetary health, maybe there is the social will to make these changes and to make them stick. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation as well. So without any delay, we have to keep the time. I give the floor to Alejandra Morena, who is coming from FIAN International, and we and member also of our NGOs networks and partners, and she will present more on the right to food and the right to food and adequate food and nutrition. Thank you very much for coming.
thank you very much. Thank you to other organizers for creating this important space, and also to the other speakers for their fantastic interventions. I'm the last one, so I'll try not to repeat too much. I will focus mainly on the human rights perspective, and in particular on the importance and added value of states taking a human rights-based approach to agroecology, and try to argue that the right to food can support them in rethinking and transforming food systems as it is clear that it is needed. This is something we all know. Food is not just something material, it is not a commodity, it is a human right. That's a human right that everyone has, and that means that states have certain binding obligations to realize it. Realizing the right to food, in short, means that states must create conditions for everyone to be able to feed themselves in dignity and to be able to fulfill all their potential. And this also entails that states must be able to provide the conditions for people to be able to access the resources that they need to produce food that is culturally adequate, that is nutritious. And this, of course, then relates on who produces food, what and how. We have seen a lot of progress in defining the content of the right to food over the past decades. States made a lot of explicit commitments. We have very interesting and important instruments, internationally, regionally. We also have seen how some how states have adopted laws at the national level. We also know that there's sufficient food being produced worldwide to feed the world. However, the picture that Emil presented at the beginning is not that encouraging. We see that hunger is on the rise, also for several years now, with 2 billion people facing food insecurity. Africa is the country that has the highest prevalence of undernourishment, with 20%. But also we see in the global north that there's problems. In Europe, 8% of the population facing severe or moderate food insecurity, and obesity increasing worldwide with all the diseases that it creates. We see the destruction of peasantry. We see that there's ongoing land grabbing and grabbing of natural resources. And we see that there's this concentration of power that was referred to around the means needed to produce food, and in general, concentration of power and corporate power. And all this creates a lot of challenges in realizing the right to food. We argue it is probably the most violated human right right now, and the threats of climate change and ecological destruction will further exacerbate this, as well as some of the new threats of new technologies that I can refer to later. So in this context, from a human rights perspective, agroecology is the way to go. And we see that it is a positive policy response to address the interconnected problems of the right to food and environment and climate. So it is clear that agroecology and the right to food are conceptually aligned. They're very much linked. This has been developed, elaborated among others by Olivier de Schutter, former UN Special Rapporteur on the right to food and co-chair of IPES-FOOD. We see that agroecology is seen by peasants' movement and grassroots movements as a pillar of food sovereignty. This is what peasants' movements want. And also evidence shows that agroecology contributes to realize the right to food in its 5 dimensions of availability, accessibility, adequacy, sustainability, and participation. The previous speakers have actually already dwelled on all these benefits of the right of agroecology. Just to emphasize, this is related to realizing the right to food. So also it is something that states should consider in their policy making. So in terms of production, this has been mentioned. It is not only important for present generations, but also future generations. As with land degradation, it will be more and more difficult to produce food. Enough examples from around the world, and I'm sure we'll hear more later. Also, in terms of reducing poverty, particularly for people and women and peasants in remote and poor areas, this is particularly important. So the less dependence you have on external inputs, the more income that you can also use for other purposes, such as health or education. So this is relating also to the accessibility aspect of the right to food. And also promoting agroecology can support states in dealing with the increasing urbanization and what has been mentioned before, the migration to rural areas. It is important to create incentives for especially young people to stay in rural areas. The importance of agroecology contributing to improved diets and nutrition has also already been mentioned with a lot of examples from around the world. And in terms of climate change, it is also clear that agroecology can mitigate climate change in many different ways. Just one example from an island of a group of women in Senegal, that by creating raised table gardens, they were able to deal with rising sea levels and saline soils and more frequent floods. And by having also this new availability of fresh vegetables for their families and communities, also they became healthier and they were able to have more income because they didn't have to travel to buy food somewhere else, and they didn't have to, they could also sell the surplus of their production. So I think this example illustrates all the points that I have mentioned before in terms of how the right to food can be advanced with agroecology. And very importantly, and this was mentioned by Ferguson a couple of minutes ago, is this issue of agency and putting people at the center. This is a key principle of human rights. People should be able to participate in decision-making on issues that affect their lives. Peasants, grassroots movements, food insecure women, they all need to be able to participate, and agroecology does that. And it can also, importantly, contribute to realizing women's rights and transforming gender relations. We have some interesting examples and case studies showing all the different dimensions on how the agroecology promotes women's rights, and how taking this feminist approach to agroecology is also important. Amongst others, in many of the agroecological processes, we see that there's efforts to have equal participation in decision making, and also we see all these examples of women-only cooperatives where women can improve their livelihoods and be take another role in their communities through agroecology. And also we've seen studies showing that women, as we know, are taking a burden of unpaid care work, an undue burden, between 5 and 10 hours a day of unpaid work, and agroecology can support women in reducing this burden for them in many different ways that if there's time we can discuss later. So yeah, just coming to the end, again, to emphasize, states have binding human rights obligations and have made explicit commitments, and agroecology can support them in realizing these obligations. And as we've seen, there's a lot of other benefits for societies and for their populations. So we argue that governments must adopt these policies that support and encourage the transition to agroecology as a part of their obligation to devote the maximum of their available resources to the progressive realization of the right to food and nutrition. And a lot of recommendations have been already made. One thing that we always like to emphasize is the primacy of human rights. People's rights come before vested interest. They should come before profit. And therefore, it's important that governments and institutions ensure coherence with human rights when they're adopting or implementing trade agreements, investment policies, and development aid. It is important that states do not promote industrial agriculture through this kind of settings. It is also important that states ensure equitable and just distribution of resources. This is a requirement for agroecology. If people do not have secure access to land, they will not invest in agroecology on a transition. They need to have access to land, to water, to seeds, to biodiversity. And then this is why agroecology goes hand in hand with policies that protect and guarantee communities and people's land rights. Especially in Africa, this entails recognizing and protecting collective tenure rights and tenure systems. And this also applies to peasant seed systems, which are also intrinsically collective. We see that international intellectual property rights are undermining the right to seeds of communities around the world. Especially women take an important role in this in continents like Africa. And in this context, states can be guided by the newly adopted UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants and other people working in rural areas that enshrines all these human rights. The right to land, the right to seeds, the right to biodiversity are there. And this is an instrument that has been strongly supported by African countries and Caribbean and Pacific countries, less so in Europe. And also we have documents like the 10-year guidelines on responsible governance of land, forests, and fisheries adopted by the Committee on World Food Security that can support states in implementing policies that can achieve all this. We also think it's important, and this is something our partners from the grassroots and social movements are very keen on, is the threats that new technologies can pose. Because even though there can be some benefits, the importance is who controls and has access to these technologies. These technologies can further drive privatization and undermine the emancipatory potential of agroecology. As we have discussed, agroecology values local resources and capacities, whereas these technologies are usually coming from a few TNCs based in richer countries. So it's a question of how these things are compatible. Also, we need to have policies that support agroecological production nationally and extraterritorially, such as public procurement schemes, as mentioned. There's interesting examples from Brazil, from Lyon, from Spain. We see sometimes that when the governments change, this goes, there's a problem, but if social movements are behind, they can sustain these transitions even with government changes. And of course, as has been mentioned, where the money flows, this is creating this unlevel playing field. So, as the colleague from the European Commission mentioned, this year is important because the financial program will be developed. So, this is the moment to see where the money will go into development cooperation, into research. This is the opportunity. Another opportunity is all the discussions around climate change and the national contributions that states need to have. We see concrete examples where progress has been made, where agroecological practices were linked to incorporating them in public policies related to climate change mitigation. So the Paris Agreement's obligations and other commitments, it's important to embed agroecology there. And just to finish, we have mentioned enough the participation of people, putting people at the center. They need to be there. We need to have more democratic governance at all levels, from the local to the international. This is why we're very strongly present in the Committee on World Food Security, where food producers are included in decision making, and we think we need to support spaces like this. And of course, the other side of this is curbing corporate influence and power. This is important. And implementing instruments that are paying attention to concrete groups, like, for example, the CEDAW Recommendation 34 on the rights of rural women can also guide states to realize women's rights in the context of agriculture. And finally, it is important that we see that marginalized non-food producers, particularly in urban settings, can also access this nutritious food. So we always think it's important that everyone has access, also in children, the elderly, the sick. So it's like how we combine social protection with policies, and also, as I also address the issue of redistributing care work and valuing as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I will not, in the interest of time, attempt to summarize anything. I think it was self-explanatory and very complementary. We have to keep on time. The second panel, we have 5 speakers. We have one more. I apologize for that, but it's what you request in the evaluation form, that we look very systematically for each of them. You want everything. You want time. You want many speakers. You want many perspectives, and you want questions. So, yes, and you want coffee. You see, my neighbor wants coffee as well, so you don't want to sacrifice coffee. So I will ask you really to be on time to come for the second panel, because we have 5 speakers coming from far, from different regions. Now we can allow some questions. I mean, if they are short, focus to some of our excellent experts, or bringing, of course, a different perspective, but very focused. If you want, please raise your hands. You have a microphone in front of you. Introduce yourself, but just name an organization question and pose your question or contribution to our panelists. And please, Felix, if we have questions also from the people following us by web stream. Thank you very much, please.
Je vais parler en français.
I will speak English. I am a farmer from Campesina, and I'm a delegate to the European Economic and Social Council, and I was able to come up with an opinion on agroeconomy and short circuits. I think this is an extremely interesting conference. And from the farm to fork approach of the European Union, I think is very interesting. I think we're very optimistic here, but in the European agricultural area, a great deal needs to be done so that agroecology can actually be seen to be the way to go. And I hope the Common Agricultural Policy can really also start to look at this, and I hope DG Development will be able to take account of all the farm to fork thinking. So my question is, can the Common Agricultural Policy really do this? How can agroecology be taken account of in the farm to fork strategy?
Take the floor. Please, the next one. I can't see. You wanted? Yes, please go on.
My name is Andries Bosma from ISRIC World Soil Information from Wageningen. Actually, I have a question for Mr. Frisson. Soil fertility, of course, is a major issue when you talk about food security. And I want to really ask a question in the light of the development of Africa for food security and for income. African soils are leached, weathered, not everywhere, but a lot. And my question to you is, do you see any room for use of fertilizer to kickstart the soils, to increase organic matters? Because I'm very sympathetic to the agroecological approaches in general, the factors which have been mentioned, but I'm a bit worried about the productivity of the ability of agroecological approaches to produce enough organic matter. Thank you.
S'il vous plaît.
Merci. Thank you. I'm from the Ambassador of Burundi here in Brussels. My question is for Mr. Brisson, who made a very interesting presentation. Do you think that conversion to agroecology will be easy or even possible for governments, multinationals, because the shareholders of the multinationals are asking for more and more profit? So let me just give you an example from Burundi, my country. In the 80s, an investor convinced the government to promote tobacco production, saying that there would be job creation, tax income for the government, and also foreign currency from exports. It was very attractive, but at the end of the day, we used to produce cereals. We were the granary, if you like, and all the trees were cut down to produce tobacco. And the region where this was grown has now becoming a desert, and there are huge deficits there. So the results are quite contrary to what was promised initially.
Good morning, everyone. So my name is Jan Hugo. I'm a co-founder and CEO of Poussez-vous, which is a curiosity, experimentation, and awareness center in Brussels. So first of all, I'm really glad to see so many people gathered around such crucial topics as agroecology. I think it's a very nice first step. I won't come back on all the arguments put forward that I agree with, but I think one of the main issues is not much about discussing such issues amongst like high-level experts panels, but more about how to raise the awareness of the markets and the general public, because a lot of the speakers have mentioned the fact that we really need to put those debates amongst the general population and to involve local people. But and don't get me wrong, I think all the subjects brought to the table today were really important and interesting, but the way they were delivered might be a very huge barrier to actually capture the interest of the public and of the people who will make the change possible. So my question is how to allocate resources in order to transfer the knowledge to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There are many actually organizations and partners who will do that, so we welcome if you can assist in there as well. I don't think there are more. You can, of course, pose them in the second part because it's all related. So please, I think, Emile, on the EU side, we will also have the experience of Agroecology Europe in the second panel as well, that you are aware that there is a presentation on that. Please, I think, for the Commission, Emile and anybody who want to add anything. Thank you.
Yes, just to reply to Genevieve, clearly the farm to fork process is a process which is across all Commission services. It's part of the Green Deal. Actually, there's a meeting at directors level tomorrow. It is steered by Sante and Agri. So Sante is also important. There is a process also. As you know, there is this idea of whether we should have or not an approach towards a more food policy approach, with all the underpinnings that Emile and colleagues mentioned. The nutrition dimension, very strong, the diversity of the diet, the links to public health, hence the DG Sante. So let's see how it will evolve. Until now, it was quite EU-centric, the farm to fork. Our role as external relations services is to embed the external dimension of the Green Deal and also to have a more holistic global approach. So that is also our role as DEFCO services. Again, this is a window of opportunity, and we are not sensing a degree of tensions across the services. It's more a question of how big is the appetite, and as I said earlier on in my introduction, the appetite across the EU member states on this process, in my opinion, remains quite limited. Also because there are a lot of questions, not because the evidence is not there, but the transition is not easy. It's not easy for the EU, but it's not easy for the developing world as well, because, as Emile said, there are vested interests. And to dismantle the process of vested interest across the value chain, even in the European Union context, you know that unfair trading practices took a long time within the EU, let alone in structures where governance, where input subsidies in a number of African countries are enormous. We are speaking about some countries where we are speaking about 5 to 10, even more percentage points of GDP being allocated to input subsidies. And I think this has not been discussed enough on how to transit from a dependence of unsmart subsidies, because subsidies, even within the European Union context, there has been a process of 50 years of decoupling approaches towards good agricultural practices, towards a more green box approach. This will take time in Africa or the Caribbean or the Pacific. The transition will take time. And I think what was not discussed is the cost or non-cost of non-transition. You can see it as like the cost of non-Europe or the cost of Europe. What is the non-cost of a transition process? What are the nudging points? What Emile mentioned as the spots, because concentration of power. How do you disentangle concentration of power. Not easy, not even in the EU, let alone when you have positioning of dominant players. This is also part of the discussion around the EU-Africa continental free trade area, because it's easy to say we have a continental free trade area. But how do you integrate Africa? You integrate Africa with dismantling the vested interest, but that can take decades. If you want to increase intra-regional trade from 17-20% to 60%, you need to see where those difficult points are in the agricultural value chain, in energy markets, and I think what we are trying to do is start to dismantling those vested interests, which is not easy. We do it through a number of instruments. We have budget support, but we also now have a process of sustainable finance. We have a taxonomy of sustainable finance, because where the money will start flowing, today it doesn't easily flow to agroecology because there are no entry points on sustainable finance. How will the big fund managers look into agroecology vis-a-vis conventional? So we need to also create a taxonomy, and that's what's being done by colleagues in FISMA and other services, including ours, to create sustainable finance modes, which actually will give the right market signals, this was mentioned earlier on, to actually channel funds into agroecology, because the evidence shows that there is a return on investment. But do those products exist on agroecology? Do green bonds exist for agroecology? Not yet. Should we design? Yes, we should co-design with also financial institutions. And that is also what we are trying to do within the process of the Green Deal, where we also bring together financial institutions, FMO, AFD, other players. I studied Positi e Prestiti in Italy to see whether, one, there is a market, there is a product, and then we start channeling the funds, because if there is a win-win in terms of the evidence from a productivity, from a health point of view, there should be a market, but however, we have to create those financial instruments to start targeting the investments and rejig it from a conventional point of view.
Thank you. The question about soil fertility and especially bringing back organic matter and the potential of doing that, I think the first thing to say, agroecology, as was mentioned earlier, doesn't have a magic formula that is universally applicable. It will depend on the local conditions. But to take concrete examples, whether it's in Malawi, Zambia, Zimbabwe, where agroecology initiatives have shown to be increasing productivity in the first year. I think that's quite significant, because in many cases, when we talk about a transition period, in countries where you start from very low input, applying agroecology principles and practices on the ground can give you benefits right from the first year or the first couple of years, which is more difficult in countries like Europe, where you have a lot of other barriers, including soils that have been really depleted and become almost sterile and need soil health to be rebuilt. When we start from conditions of subsistence agriculture and bringing in agroecology, we've seen really productivity increases very significant, sometimes doubling productivity or more right from the beginning. So the question of should we also have some fertilizers, I think there's no general rule. If you look at the FAO documents on agroecology, there is not something that says that you cannot use any fertilizer in there. I think we have to really look at the conditions locally. But to say that we always will have to start by putting a bit of fertilizer to kickstart, I think that's a wrong approach. It has been shown that you can really increase productivity very significantly right from the beginning by applying agroecological practices. The second question about will conversion be easy? Well, if it was that easy, probably it would have been done. And I think we highlighted already some of the obstacles that make it more difficult. But there are very concrete, again, concrete examples where it is happening. We mentioned India, where things are happening at scale. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of farmers that have made the conversion. And we must realize that a lot of the incentives that push, for example, to move to tobacco production, again, don't look at any of the externalities on the impact it has had on deforestation, on degradation of land. So it is a matter of bringing to the attention of decision makers the need for policy changes. Again, Fergus also mentioned the issue of fertilizer subsidies that continue to be pushed in many countries, where at the end of the day, the money is in the pocket of the fertilizer companies, and very little benefits go to the actual farmers. So yeah, it's not going to be easy, but I think taking the approach of looking beyond just productivity of a single commodity and yield per hectare, as has been the focus in the past, to a more comprehensive set of outcomes that matter to society, I think that's a way to really move quickly. And I think one concrete example of combating the influence of vested interest, there's been a lot of promotion of GMO technology, for example, in Uganda, where legislation was about to be put in place to allow GM technology to be deployed in the field. And at the last minute, the president, Museveni, has said, no, we don't want, not because of GM technology not being safe or not being healthy or whatever, but the reason was that we don't want to be dependent or in the hands of multinational companies that control the GM technology. And I think this is one concrete example where a political decision at a senior level can really overcome these the influence of vested interests.
You have a final word, Fergus or Alejandra, something to add very, very quickly?
Just quickly on the fertilizer issue, I think there are some really serious issues here. Not just that if you start from a very depleted state, you need a strategy to build up organic matter, but phosphorus is a critical issue connected to urbanization, that most of the phosphorus is transported away from the field. And it's fine if you've got a rock phosphate deposit somewhere nearby. If you haven't, then there are some real issues about how the recycling and so on. And this is also very much connected to livestock and integrated livestock systems, which we haven't really had a time to explore. But I think you're putting your finger on something which is really critical in terms of long-term sustainability of agriculture, which inevitably involves taking things away from a field. So and that's not something we should be shying away from at all, but we need to be finding solutions that are more sustainable than the ones that we have at the moment. And ISRIC's approaches that involve being able to look very locally at what is needed is, of course, a huge improvement on what has happened in the past, where blanket sort of applications have gone on. Just linking back to the sustainable finance comment that Leonard made, I mean, that's absolutely critical. And of course, that's where the metrics become very important, because if you're going to apply a sustainability criteria to finance, then you need to measure whether or not an investment is sustainable. And doing that in a cost-effective manner is really critical. So developing those metrics so that they can be practically applied, I think is absolutely critical. And a final comment that I would make is, and I think maybe underlying a bit the comment on the fertilizer, is it's really important that agroecology is not anti-science. It is not anti-technology. It is not anti the private sector. It's often characterized in that way, but it isn't. But as we've heard time and time again already this morning, the issue is of power asymmetry and how technology is used and controlled. Those are the issues that we need to be about, and we need to get off this sort of simplistic, knee-jerk type of reaction, which I've had a lot of difficulty with getting some of these reports through peer review because of these type of knee-jerk reactions. And we need a more mature debate that takes power asymmetry as a key issue that needs to be dealt with in agriculture and food systems, rather than something that gets, put under the carpet.
Yes, you're fine, right? Yeah. So thank you very much. We have the coffee break now. Please just take 10 minutes maximum, because you can bring the coffee in the room. Thank you very much. A big applause to all our speakers and panelists in the introductory remarks. Thank you. The chair of our second panel will be Émile Frison, so I don't need to introduce him again. And the closing remarks will be made by our director at CTA, Michael Ailou, who you know very well as well. So thank you very much. The speakers will keep to their time and will help Émile in that task as well.
Thank you,
and
Isolina.
you still have, sorry, excuse me, Émile. You still have the lunch as well for networking and further questions. We have a lunch together afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Isolina. So in this second panel, we will hear what is happening on the ground in Africa, but also in Europe. And I think this is an important part of the discussions, to see concretely what has the success stories that we can hear, and also the demand from the actors on the ground, farmers' organizations in particular. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Ibrahima Coulibaly, who is the president of ROPA. He has been really a motor in pushing agroecology in West Africa, and both within ROPA itself, but also in partnership with IPES-FOOD in putting in place the Alliance for Agroecology in West Africa, that is bringing together now almost 60 organizations from the region, and are really working to mainstream agroecology in the region. So, Ibrahima, à toi.
Non, bon, bon, en fait, je vais pas utiliser le PowerPoint.
I'm not going to use my PowerPoint presentation. I only have 10 minutes, so I prefer not to use it. I hope it's not a problem for the Assembly. I thank you very much. Thank you, Émile. Good morning. I'm really delighted to be here this morning at this briefing to talk about agroecology and about what obtains on the ground, this necessary transition that we're trying to push for in West Africa. For those who don't know my organization, we're an organization of farmers' organization in West Africa, around the ECOWAS sub-region. And we work on improving policies for family agriculture to be taken into account. We work on defending family farms. That's the mainstream agriculture in our region. And we try to promote, to defend that form of agriculture. It has always existed in our region. And our strategies turned around reducing the risk of family farming. But we are faced with a big challenge. There is no coordination between what happens on this type of family farmings and the public policies. Therefore, their responses are do not always tally with the needs of the families. Our West African region has gone through many crises. We've known droughts in the 70s, and there is more and more awareness of the reality of climate change in our region. And we know that it's not going to be business as usual. There is a competition for the use and management of resources, especially in the Sahel region of West Africa. And recently, we all know that this has led to armed conflicts in the region. Every day on the news, we hear about casualties in the region. And I believe all that has to do with the fact that responses from governments and policymakers have not been focused on the signs showing that we needed to invest and support this type of agriculture and the leverages to allow it to be more resilient so as to better respond to the needs of the farmers as well as the consumers in cities. Policymakers needed money and invested in commercial crops, coffee, cocoa, and this has impoverished family farmers, especially in regions where these commercial crops have been developed. That's where you'll find a greater number of poor farmers, contrary to regions where people produce more for their own consumption. Another consequence has been the food bill of our region, $2 billion per year. That is far more than what is invested by our countries in agriculture. And yet we have a huge agricultural potential, and we are a dependent region. Many agroecological practices stems out of our region. The Mosi Plateau, for instance, in the current Burkina Faso, is a region that was faced with a population boom. One of the responses was a migration of the population, but people have also developed some practices to redress the land degradation problem through various practices to stop erosion. And farmers themselves have invented those practices. They have restored their lands and were able to continue to live on those formerly unproductive lands. So agroecology is not new for us. It's embedded in our agricultural heritage. Families see seeds as part of this family heritage and protect them to use them year in and year out. And so we've had all these strategies around cash crops, the green revolution that could have improved the productivity of family farming. And so we've experienced a very important pressure on policymakers who've committed themselves into those paths through free fertilizers that farmers didn't want to use at first. And gradually, they have adopted those the fertilizers and got involved in a cycle with increasing prices of fertilizers. Today, the use of these chemical fertilizers do not go beyond 4 or 5 kilos per hectare. So we see that they don't improve production. People manage to improve the fertility of their soils through other means. In the 80s, we experienced the structural adjustment programs. So government did not have any more monies to maintain their policies. They've pulled back from these strategies. So That's led to an awareness, more awareness, and farmers and their partners have taken over, have trained themselves. So that was a new dynamism through school farms and training institutions. Today, among the EuropeAid member countries, many farmers' organizations in Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and Senegal have developed, established institutes of training in agroecology to reduce the risk for family farmers. Moreover, they offer better responses, which also allow to improve the revenues of these families. The agroecological issue is not universally understood today, but what is clear on the ground is that farmers are not asking themselves all these questions. They want to solve their problems. In that vein, they turn to what will allow them to reduce the production cost and improve their revenues. These practices are therefore more and more being adopted by family farmers. We've put in place some strategies to form some young trainers so as to allow them train farmers in their villages. Also, as it was said before, all these strategies are marginalized by our governments. Most of them, after the 2008 food crisis, have started subsiding food agricultural intrants in some countries to the tune of 40-50 billion CFA per year invested to subsidize the fertilizers. Some other governments subsidize the sale of tractors that are out of reach from family farmers. Those equipments cost around $24,000 or euros each. And so those families cannot afford them. And yet their real needs is to have 2 cows or just being able to produce compost. They don't benefit from concrete subsidy. We have no subsidies in those areas. All governments want to only subsidize tractors in West Africa. So there is a discrepancy between what farmers need and what governments want to promote, because there are so many financial interests behind. We have companies who selling those equipments. The representative from Burundi said it before me. And so these are all things that happen that are not normal. That's why we've created some alliances. Emile said it before me. The 3AO Alliance, for instance. Why? Because we want to work together to promote the same issues so as to be heard, so that public assistance be more open and turn towards the needs of the farmers, so as to support family farming at national and regional level. That will not be possible if we work alone. That's why we have established the 3AO Alliance in West Africa for countries to turn towards a agroecological transition and invest where it counts. And many things are happening on the ground today. Our alliance is a very important actor today in the region. Many farmers' organizations or civil service organizations collaborating with us. And it is through this multi-actor dialogue that we're going to reduce the influence of these financial interests who dictates things in our country, to allow countries to be more open to our needs and to take into account the needs of the most vulnerable. And we believe it is one of the solutions to the problem of insecurity, one of the recurring problems in our region. We cannot solve the problem, the security problem, without eradicating poverty. Many family farmers have to work in a degrading environment. They have to cut trees and make coal that they sell to have money. We have to change that. Otherwise, we cannot go on saying that we want to fight against climate change. But the reality is that people need to feed themselves every day. So we need to convince everyone that some solutions exist. A little story before I end. I was in a little farm in Benin some time ago, where they don't have any animals. They use the rest of the food to cover the need in gas. And these are very little investments which we can adopt for people to use fuel for food. That can be used also in urban areas. Therefore, I believe that we have to be able to invest in these choices, in what makes the difference and what allows to improve the productivity of these farms, because they're able to produce their own fertilizers and use practices that reduce risk. One of the major risks in our region is that governments have focused on maize production, but we have a pest that destroys these fields. And we have caterpillars that have reached those farms. And I believe it's through seeds importation. Maize production today is going to be jeopardized. And I was surprised to note that in Europe, sorghum is developed because it's believed to be a resilient and safe food crop. And I'm very sorry that Africa rather is going in the wrong direction. Thank you.
Merci, Ibrahima.
I thank you, Ibrahima, for this very concrete communication. There is this very convincing presentation on the needs of farmers' organization.
President of Agroecology Europe, and who will be giving a perspective from the European side. Paola.
Okay. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for giving us the opportunity and the possibility to be here and share our vision and our activity. Agroecology Europe is a young association, relatively, compared to also other associations that are already very active at European level in agroecology and food sovereignty. It was founded in 2016, mainly at the beginning from a volunteer of group of, maybe at the beginning researcher and professor from university, academic, because we really felt what it was pointed out before, the need to produce and collect data, evidence, result of good stories, of good action about agroecology, and because for many years, as also it happened already for the organic movement that is, let's say, very strongly linked to agroecology, for many years it was considered not let's say, not scientific or with low reputation. So we wanted to evidence that and to give a good estimation and consideration of agroecology, of course, when there are good data, not to say so, based on evidence. So I will skip, you will find in the presentation the reason why we need a change, so I will not focus on that. Maybe very briefly, I would like to say that agroecology, even though now it's in some place, so anyhow at European level, FAO, something that is becoming popular for, is not just recent of 2 years ago, but have an history behind, and also in the academia, in the scientific process, went along with ecology and ecology in agriculture. I would say that also agroecology, Europe have provided a definition on what is agroecology, because we thought that it was needed to define. Also, we call it our understanding of agroecology, because again, it's very important to link the agroecology movement and conceptual and identity at a local level. So in different region, in different country, in different place, has to be tackled to the cultural approach and cultural value of it. So I will reconnect with what the HLPI group did it this year, let's say last year, where they produced this, I would say maybe effort and summary very strong. I know about bringing the different point of view, and so producing this 13 principle. Of course, again, this principle must be seen as a general idea that drive the three-repartite approach of agroecology, as we define it. So the principle should guide the scientific discipline, the movement, and the, in general, approach, practical approach in agroecology. For example, for the scientific point of view, we have the three scale, so the plot field approach, the agroecosystem level, farming level, and the ecological food system approach. In movement, there are many different, from environmental, more social, more political, and rural development. And in the approach and practice, I would like today to stress two things. From one side, the system thinking approach, so the transdisciplinary relationship among different point of view and discipline and roles, and this is also why we developed, we wanted to push Agroecology Europe as an association, mainly with two reasons: to really bring together research, farmer, and civil society and NGO, and we are very happy that at the moment the association is making alive with a lot of young people, and this is for us, it's already a very strong result. In the last forum, the majority were students and young people. So there is a strong feeling from youth generation to be active in this, and this is for us is already a result. The focus is to place agroecology high in the European agenda, so to help policymakers in find the local, the national right tool to support and to develop agroecology at all levels. And also to, as already Fergus said, to foster interaction. Interaction among who? Among different stakeholders, so science, policymaker, social movement, and so this is, it's very, for us, it's very important inside the association. The second focus is about education. So again, as myself, I'm a researcher and teacher. We call ourselves facilitator of changes, because youth people, we don't want to teach anything. We want to develop together our inner development. So there are already in Europe and around the world a lot of different associations. Of course, Via Campesina that is present is one, but there are very old story about it. About the practices, I would like to say something more, because it was requested by Isolina, and to give some practical example about what are practices. So there are many, and through policy we should help the system to evolve and keep all together as an approach. Okay, so it's not just to choose one as a pickle, but to because all of them are correlated, so we can't avoid one of them. Let's say they are system related, because we learn from ecology. So from the decision about choosing the right variety, the right crop, the right population, till the market and relations of economy. So the question before about, for example, the productivity and relation within organic fertilizer, my question would be in which pedoclimatic condition we are, what is the crop and what is the variety, so the genetic about that variety, for which purpose, what is the market for that. So there are many questions that we should pose before answering that question. Okay, so it's much more complex. So from a cropping system practices at field level, of course, the good practices in agroecology are, for example, direct seeding, living mulch, again, to reduce tillage and to have a good relationship, of course, in soil, organic fertilizer, biofertilizer, local and drip irrigation. System thinking, very important, the connection between crop choice and spatial distribution, both in space and temporal, so the intercropping, and very important, the relationship within animal and livestock, that is not enough stress. So it's very, very important not to separate cropping system with animal. And of course, the weed, pest, disease management is deal with some local, so control about natural enemies, and so landscape level become a key element to give space, environment, food, water to beneficial insects that control the food web. This is just at cropping system level. Then, regarding science, also there was an evolution from, let's say, very specific plot field relationship or scene ecology or autoecology to a more system approach. So where different I'm for example, trained as an agronomy, but every day I talk and develop projects with anthropologists, economists, even philosophers. So the approach should be really transdisciplinary. And there are many research priorities today. For example, I just mentioned one or two, glyphosate alternative. And the point is that it's not true that there is the technical answer, but we have to work in a local system to help everybody to adapt to that, for example, solution. This can come from a public, either for a private sector. For example, there are some municipalities that have ban or anyhow, let's say, reduce in public. Also in the kindergarten place, very often it's used glyphosate to kill weeds, and then the kids eat the glyphosate. This is, I say it as a mother, because I saw with my eyes. And then there are also very good stories, for example, also by private sector, because, for example, Coop in Italy have banned glyphosate in the product with the label about Coop. So it's possible. Of course, we have to give all the support to producer, the information to the consumer, and to help everybody in the system to support this decision. Okay, this is just to mention one of them that is already mentioned. Then my final focus would like to be in economy. I'm not a pure economist, but we developed a paper together, mainly within Agroecology Europe people, but not only, drove by Jan Douw van de Ploeg. The theoretical framework, again, is to go out from the only to the productivity issue. Of course, farmer earns because they produce and sell something, but less than production, we focus on the value. So on the added value and the reduction of external cost. So in this graph developed by my colleague Alain Peters, in conventional, you have high external cost because, again, subsidies force farmer to buy big tractor, to buy external seed, to buy fossil fuel, to buy some maybe new technology. That, of course, let's say the focus should be to help the farmer to reduce the amount of heavy work, so to have an easy life. But on the other hand, to have at least the same productivity or even more than conventional. So how to do this? In the paper is explained. It's very simple. But anyhow, from one way, we have to reduce the direct, the cost of production that in conventional agriculture, also due to CAP approach, is about investment and machinery. So through agriculture, we have for many, many years subsidize the industrial production. On the other hand, we have to help the system to provide the right, we call economy of relationship, okay, not economy of, let's say, not economy of product, of scale, but economy of relationship. So when there is a good development in a local level about place correctly the value of the product, and so focus on quality and not on quantity. And through this analysis, we have presented several cases that also before Emile presented. We got the information that when there is, we presented many cases in Italy, in France, in 15 countries. In Europe, agroecology have a higher result about added value and gross value. So there is a better relationship related to place of the production in the economy. Then I will conclude, of course, how to do this. How can we help the system, the local system, to develop economy, local economy, to again diversified, increase the internal resource and decrease the external input. And focus on labor and on relationship of farmer and consumer. This is mainly the key message I would like to give. So to conclude, again, in the former Gliessman 5-step approach, there are many entry points where agroecology can play a very important role to improve rural development and also the link between health, environment, and agriculture, that this is the final goal, as already Mr. From European Union said before, that it's, Mizzi, sorry, it's very important. And on the other hand, the role of education. So through courses, for example, in my university, we are developing a master course in agroecology and food sovereignty. But through any kind of education, we practice our, we develop our core competence, better dialogue, better visioning, to improve reflection and discussion among us. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Paola. We'll move back to Africa now, and as was mentioned already about the innovation dimension of agroecology, that is very important. The co-creation of knowledge also between farmers and researchers is important, and we will have an example now about agroecological participatory action research that is really looking at creating, innovating in a way that is not isolated from the action on the ground, but rather integrating scientific knowledge with farmer traditional knowledge. So I invite Tabasima Kigwa to make its presentation.
Thank you, everybody, for the opportunity that I'm here to speak about Uganda, and greetings from Uganda. A good afternoon. It is now a sunny time in Uganda, and fortunately we have also the sun during winter now. So for me, it's nice to put on my t-shirt in this afternoon. Yeah. So, and I have realized that 10 minutes of European time is very small, so I will not go point by point, but I will give an overview about farming in Uganda, and I'll also talk about our project, the Mpanga Super Farmer project, briefly, because this is where most of my cases will be based, that we have used these participatory methods to create a development that is owned by the people. And I will give, certainly, I will share about how we develop our participatory approaches. So Uganda is basically a small country that is located along the equator. And this also brings a lot of diversity in terms of possibilities to do agriculture, but it also poses certainly several challenges for the farmers, which implies that you cannot have one magical bullet that is addressing all the challenges of the farmers in the different locations. It's a country that is having a very high population growth rate, and majority of the youth, where more than 78% of the youth are actually without an employment. And Emily has noted very well, our president is very concerned about our farming systems because he knows this is the backbone of the economy. However, although he has been very keen on policies regarding agriculture, we realize that, for example, the allocation to the agricultural sector has never gone beyond 5%, although we have made a lot of commitments to ensure that we have a more than 10% allocation to agriculture. And for this matter, given the situation that the farmers are, for example, having not good access to advisory services, to the resources to do appropriate production on their smallholder farms, which are basically less than 1 hectare in terms of land, we therefore looked at the key challenges and how to facilitate the development process for such smallholder farmers. And this is the origin of the Mpanga Super Farmer program, for which I will give most of the cases. And in the preparation of this intervention, we realized that there is always an interaction between the economic state of the household, the environment, the surrounding resources, but also the social interactions among these households. So we looked at what kind of system is capable to deliver these 3 key elements. And this is where agroecology becomes very key in delivering these 3 key elements for a sustainable family farm. And in there, we actually saw that even if we try to bring solutions for the people without their participation, it might not create the impact that is required. Therefore, we realize that from this interaction of the elements of agroecology, which is also key for the household, there is need for a participatory advisory system. And therefore, we developed with the farmers what elements are key for a participatory advisory system. And this is where we actually have the opportunity that we are working in 2 areas for this Mpanga Super Farmer program. where one area is located in the mountain and another area is located in the lowland. And therefore, we have to develop options that are not similar for these different ecological zones. And we have a catchment, which is a river that is connecting actually these two communities, and the resources are therefore shared. And for these interactions, also in the nature, it means we as human beings also have to recognize that there is this interaction in the natural system, but also in the social system. And therefore, we can always think of having different alternatives that can work for the people. So in Uganda, what is majorly characterizing the advisory system? We see that in most cases, when we use participatory approaches, there is always listening to the people, and these people are defining their development pathways. They are relying mostly on the locally available resources than expecting external inputs. However, when you look at the traditional government system of advising farmers, it's structured in a way that there is no possibility of a continuous interaction between the farmer advisor and the farmer. Actually, what happens is that you find a farmer advisor seated in their office advising themselves and only having a continuous ideas of what to do in the next planning period, and then the translation of these practices never happens. So we therefore dwell on participatory tools to do research, but also the research itself being a form of advising, and this advising recognizing that there is learning for both the who would call themselves experts and also the farmers themselves. Hence, a co-creation of knowledge that is actually beneficial for both and is able to be translated into real practice. So for participatory action research, here which we call the PAR, it's about ensuring that the process is actually continuously reflecting what the farmers identify as key problems, what in their perception are the key solutions to these problems, and then the farmer advisor or the scientist is actually coming in to trigger the mind of the farmer to think about alternatives. But opposed to the conventional research system, where the scientist is actually seated somewhere and developing solutions that may never be taken up by the farmers. And why do we do participatory action research? Why are we involving the farmers in this research? Because we realize that there is a lot of diversity even in small as a community itself. A solution that is developed maybe 2-3 kilometers away is not easily adapted by the farmer. Therefore, it's very key to actually address these challenges of diversity and hence be able to create the adoption and adaptation. And we realize that for participatory action research in agroecology or in any other development system, it has to be actually central, because we can never claim that we have actually attained the knowledge about a dynamic farming system. There is always these interactions, there are always continuous changes. So knowledge which is created about 5 years ago, for example, is now being challenged by climate change. It means we can never get tired, and therefore there is need to continuously learn about the interaction of the farming system. And so far, what have we attained through our participatory action research? We have been able to engage the government institutions that are responsible for research, which had never come out of their buildings. Now we can work with them in the communities to conduct research where the problem is identified with the farmers, with the scientists, and then the knowledge is being shared. So here we have the National Agricultural Research Organization, for example. There's also a local university called Mountains of the Moon University, where farmers come together and they develop solutions. And these solutions are actually working for the farmers. For example, identifying varieties of crops which can fit within the local conditions, but are also accepted and appreciated by the local people. We have also designed, there was a question about how to ensure that we have enough, for example, compost on the farm. We have designed a system where, through covering the land using live mulches, we can be able to generate amounts that are sufficient to actually cover the soil from degradation. And some of the pictures that are showing our participatory processes where we do research, you can see on the extreme upper right, one of the participatory approaches that we are using, the integrated farm planning, which is very key, that we are sitting with the household and they are designing a system which can enable interaction of the different elements on the farm, and it is able to actually co-function together such that the inputs from one system are working for the other system, but it is also to enable the continuity of the farm. So this becomes very key. It's a participatory process that is key in ensuring that we are designing a functioning system. And there is also, of course, certainly creation of knowledge, interaction, and continuous learning. I like to conclude about our involvement with the farmers being participatory by noting that basically for the farmer, what is most interesting is not the complexity of the science or what names you give it, but it is actually the solutions that it offers in practice. No matter how basic the research could be, but as long as it addresses a challenge for the farmers, it offers a practical solution. That is what matters. It's not the methodological approach that is for the scientists, but what the farmer wants to see is a translation in their economy, is a translation in their sustainability of the environment on which they are actually dependent, and how it enhances their living together in a community, the spirit of socialization. And this kind of participation is actually not new, but maybe has been abandoned for some time. But when you look into the innovations, particularly in Africa, for example, I will give the case of iron smelting. It was always that the iron smelter will actually sit along the way in an open public place, where, for example, people are going to the market. And what happens? In most cases, people are always keen to see the mistake. And whenever they see the mistake, then they would actually whisper to each other, commenting, and the iron smelter would listen to these negative comments. And maybe they are saying, we wish the handle had been longer. By the time they come from the market, the iron smelter has made actually a suitable equipment that was being proposed by these people. And therefore, this continuous listening to the people would enable the iron smelter to produce what is preferred by the user than actually where they maybe would wish to design what they feel is appropriate. And therefore, we actually have to listen more to the people, give them an opportunity that they are showing us the direction that defines their development. Generally, I call upon a continuation of supporting such a collaboration to ensure that we are co-creating knowledge which works for the people. And agroecology, we have looked at the numerous benefits, so I cannot keep repeating these benefits, but we know that for agroecology, recognizing the dynamics in the farming system that require co-creation of knowledge, we can actually not, we can never think that we have understood the system, and we have to continue learning and exploring more how the farming system functions. And by that, we naturally have to continue listening to the people and finding solutions together, ensuring that the development is based on what the people believe in and strongly appreciate. As I realized from the beginning that the time is really very limited, I would like to thank you for your listening, but also I like to recognize those with whom we are partnering in development for these participatory approaches. ILDP and Broader Lijek Delen, who are here also present, and in our interactions we can share more. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Tadeo, for this very concrete presentation. We will continue in Africa, looking more particularly at agroforestry and reforestation. We've heard already that the issue of the use of wood is very important, and I think the potential of reforestation and agroforestry, especially in areas such as the Sahel, is extremely important. And we'll have the concrete example here from Senegal. And Mansour Diaye, the floor is over to you.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. I'd like to start by speaking about myself very briefly. I have a quite untypical career. I started after studying agronomics with conventional farming. For 25 years, I've contributed to destroying the environment. As a civil servant, that was my task. So when I left, I chose a different path. I want to restore what I contributed to destroy. And I think humanity or the Senegalese will forgive me for having made that mistake. And luckily, I've changed my ways. We have an NGO called APAF, the Association for the Promotion of Agroforestry. We work in 7 African countries: Togo, Burkina Faso, Mali, Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire, Benin, and Cameroon. We are supported by an international NGO, APAF International, based in France. We have also branches in Switzerland and Belgium. Our mission is to contribute to restore deteriorated natural ecosystems. Let me give you some key points. Let's take the example of Senegal, a country that is 180,000 square kilometers. We have 3.5 million hectares of farmland, but unfortunately 66% has been deteriorated, completely degraded. Every day we lose 123 hectares of farmland. That is FAO statistics. That's 40,000 hectares per year. Rainfall has decreased by 40% over the last 30 years. Groundwater is reducing dangerously, and the temperatures are increasing. Income of farmers is dwindling. Rural exodus has become a problem. Farmers can no longer live from their lands. That's why we have to look towards agroforestry, an ancestral technique that farmers have been practiced since ancient times. Now, as APAF, we're doing nothing new, but we want to bring back this ancient technique that seems to have been forgotten. Before, farmers worked between the trees. They had good yields. The trees were sustained. They obtained high yields. They produced a lot of grains, a lot of cereal. But with the introduction of industrial farming, we have groundnuts. All the trees have been cut down to make space for growing groundnuts. And what are the results? The soil has been deteriorated. The land is becoming dry. We get less rain. It used to start being dry in April. Now in January we have about 30 degrees Celsius. In May and June it's around 40 degrees Celsius. And the groundwater, as I said, is reducing. The farmers are struggling to find water to drink.
In West Africa, farmers are working only 3 months a year, and in 3 months, they cannot really make enough money. Now, this is because the rainy season is only 2 to 3 months, and that's what happened this year in Senegal. And in 2 or 3 months, farmer cannot make enough money to have a worthwhile life. And so we have to deal with degraded earth. We need to make sure that we have the temperatures go down, and we can only deal with that if we approach this in a holistic manner by replanting trees. Trees are the only way, as this is a huge problem. We need to go fast. We need to plant evergreens that can help to restore the earth. And we have the seeds, and we need to bring water to the farmers. And that's one of the main difficulties. Well, very briefly, as I'm supposed to put everything into 10 minutes, let me go as quickly as possible. So what do we do? Farmers are involved in the entire agroforestry process. It's a participatory approach. And family or smallholders are the ones that benefit from what we are doing, because in Africa and in Senegal, these are the ones who develop farming. And if we don't work with them, there will be no results. 80% of food security or food self-sufficiency can be achieved through these small holdings. And this is why we work with them. In order to work with them, they must be included. And they are extremely important for the agroforestry approach. From the conception to implementation phase, we have them with us, we support them, we train them, we guide them, but they are the ones who take the main decisions. They are the main beneficiaries. They decide on the plans, and we support them throughout the process. The image that you see there is an information meeting. So farmers need to first and foremost be informed of what they can benefit from agroforestry. And that's the first thing that we do, the main thing that we do. In all the beneficiary villages in a given year, we hold these information meetings. Well, I told you what the results were for Senegal, or what the situation was for us. About 30 to 40% of the forest destroyed by the year, over 2 million hectares, and rainfall going down, and natural pasture land also disappearing. Our fawn is also being destroyed. in about 80,000 hectares, we see the fauna disappearing, and there's also a drop in groundwater. Now, and we're not far from the sea in many cases, and if the groundwater goes down, it is polluted by seawater, and farmers can no longer have drinking water. So this was the awareness building meeting, the information meeting. So the farmers are informed of the entire process. These are nurseries that the farmers themselves put in place. And we inoculate these trees for both bacteria in the beginning to boost their growth and to make it possible for them after 2 to 3 years for them to carry out the restoration of the ground. And this is what we've seen from working with the farmers that we've met in all the villages. They came up with their teams for tree nurseries, and they are responsible for them. Here, this is a plot of land where we have market gardening and trees, so that everything can be associated, if you like. On one side, there is a pepper growing. On the left, you'll see that was planted this year, and there are trees there too. This was planted in September 2019, and this is what you have in just 4 months. You see how much the trees have grown 1 month, and they've already been inoculated with natural bacteria. So we work closely with research institutes on the ground and universities that work on microbiology of soils, because the bacteria are very active microorganisms and contribute a great deal to the trees, and so they need to be studied to see how they can contribute. And they help us to monitor how organic matter is working with the earth, with the soils, and pH levels, etc. And we often send samples to the laboratories to see what is happening. And this is how we work on soil fertility as well. Now, on the left, this is a nursery that was created by women, the one before too, and these are women planting. Whether it's for trees or other crops, we want the farmers to plant different things within these plots of land. So agroecology and also other plants. This is a plant that helps with malaria that has been introduced to these plots of land for the benefit of the populations. On the right, you'll see it's rice. This is where they would before had to have a much less organized approach to growing rice, and this is now done in lines. This is what we've been encouraging them to do. This is another plot where there's a group of women who are planting the nursery trees. So women have been able to manage their nurseries and also carry out the transplanting. And we look at the size of trees, the roots, etc. And the women themselves are responsible for the entire process. They can recognize the various different trees, identify them, etc. And in the 1 hectare, there's a density of planting of 200 plants or saplings per hectare. And each one can contribute about 10 tons of organic material, which is much more cost-effective than compost, especially in a context where water is increasingly scarce. And the trees drop organic matter about 10 tons per hectare.
Donc voilà, ça aussi c'est une parcelle qui...
This is another plot that was put down in September in 2019. And you see this is millet, the harvest of millet. And so the farmers can make money and also have crop rotation in the same area of land. And then also with the trees, they can start to produce coal after 4 years. So these are our achievements over 7 years, 1.50 million trees in these plots. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Diaye. We will have a last presentation from Malawi. Ellen will be talking to us about the relationship between agroecology and climate. We know that climate resilience is important and is becoming more important, and we will hear about the potential of agroecology to increase the resilience of our production systems. So, Ellen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk about agroecology. Climate situation in Malawi has been so bad for so many years. The country was once hit by El Nino in 2015 to 2016. Then again, last year, 2019, it was badly hit again by Cyclone Idai. We have floods, we have dry spells, armyworms, and land degradation. To the extent that our government has been declared a state of emergency. Now let me talk about the Cyclone Idai. In 2019, there was this worst floods that hit Malawi. Crops were washed away, livestock was killed, and about 60 people drowned. I personally was also affected. I lost almost everything. Only the crops that I grew on upland survived. In 2016, the rains did not come. Crops, I'm sorry, I'm not changing that, I'm just, sorry. Yeah, let me just, In 2016, the rains did not come. Crops wilted. There was not enough water for our crops. That rendered us into shortage of food. We also have got new pests because of the climate change, which is called fall armyworms. It is uncontrollable to date. As I talk now, we are in the rainy season in my country. We have planted our maize and they have been attacked by the same. So all this happening, we become food insecure. What are the women farmers' specific challenges in Malawi? Women farmers in Malawi do not own land because of the bad cultural practices which only allow men and boy children to own land. So this being the case, a woman cannot decide what to grow because she may grow this year, tomorrow that land is not hers. We also have limited access to public extension workers. One extension worker, the ratio is 1 extension worker to 3,000 farmers. So that gap is too much. Public extension does not promote agroecology, but the private ones are with us. There is also limited participation of women smallholder farmers in decision-making processes, which result into lack of privatization of women smallholder farmers' needs. This is so because of the high illiteracy level in women. We in COFA practice agroecology. I myself and my fellow women from COFA, we produce our local seeds. We use our local seeds. We save them. We keep them for the next planting session. We keep them in clay pots, in glass jars, and plastic jars, tightly covered. We have individual seed banks. Each woman keeps her own seeds for the next growing season. The seeds are promoted and shared amongst individual farmers through seed fairs, which we do every year at district level. This empowers us to have full control of seeds and what to grow and at what time. Smallholder women farmers cannot afford to buy the seed, the hybrid that is, because it is so expensive and it is bought every year. It is never repeated. The hybrid seeds have to be bought every year. Hybrid seeds are expensive for those who use them, not COFA. We don't use them. We use our indigenous seed. We also practice intercropping. Intercropping means planting a number of different crops at the same time on the same piece of land. This helps to curb the challenge of shortage of land by smallholder women farmers. I myself own 5 hectares of land where I grow 3 hectares maize, 1 hectare sugar beans, half hectare soya, and half hectare groundnuts. I intercrop. So it is maize with sugar beans, maize with groundnuts, maize with soybeans, so that my maize should enjoy the nitrogen fixed by the legumes. This technology is showcased and shared to fellow women farmers through seed fairs and learning visits. We visit each other, this area to this area, or this district to the other district, and we share the knowledge and our seed. As we do this, ActionAid supports us. It documents our practices and share them widely among smallholder farmers at all levels. We use manure in our crops. We produce manure from animals like cattle, goat, and pigs, and also from compost. We use this to make compost to apply to the soil, and we let the soil feed the plant. We also mulch our crops so that moisture is not lost. We also use traditional knowledge and practices to fight pests, like the 4-armyworm I was talking about. We, local farmers, have found a solution to that. We get a small type of fish. In my country, it is called usipa. We pound it, then add sugar to it, then stir, mix that. Then we get a pinch of it and drop it on top of the maize crop. When you do that, after 15 to 20 minutes, that worm comes out. It wants to eat the sugar and the usipa I'm talking about. So when we come, we just push it down and kill it. And it has worked. The pesticides that the government distributed have never worked. They failed. It sounds, it sounds silly like, but it has worked. Really? Then, how did I start agroecology, I myself? It was this year when I wanted to send my only boy to a better school. So I used all my resources to allow my boy to go to that school. I had no money to buy fertilizer. So that year, I failed completely. So when my friend heard about that, she came to visit and said, Ellen, why have you failed? I said, I had no money. I didn't buy fertilizer. I thought that the fertilizer I had used the previous year would still work this other year. But that never worked. So my friend said, no, friend, you are just wasting your time. You have goats here, you have pigs, you have cattle. Why don't you make manure as I do? So she taught me how to do it, I did it, and I made it. From that time to date, I use manure. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Ellen, for another very concrete example on how agroecology works for the smallholder farmers in Africa. So I think we'll have just time for a couple of questions. We have an urgent question there.
Bonjour, Michel Hélas, Triangle 7.
Thank you, Michel Hélas, Triangle 7, from Mr. Bansudai. You spoke about fertilizing trees that replace fertilizers. So these seem to be very surprising and extraordinary trees. Could you tell me more about them? What are their effects on the soil and on harvest?
Yeah, in the back there.
Actually, it's Ingrid Prim from the German Development Corporation, GIZ. Actually, it's not a question, just a brief comment, as it was already mentioned by Leonard Mitzi at the beginning, that Germany is very open to the concept of agroecology. I just wanted to deepen and say that Germany is really committed to agroecology, and I think this will be deepened and will be a big issue for us. Actually, there are discussions ongoing on how to get to a kind of action plan, how to mainstream this into the German development portfolio. And as you maybe know, our German ministry, BMZ, is spending 1.5 billion euro annually. It's investing in food security and agriculture. So this is a way forward for us, for the German Development Corporation as well. And obviously trying to look up and join efforts with other initiatives ongoing. So briefly, a comment from our side. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for that contribution. And indeed, it is a relatively recent development and a very encouraging one. So we hope that this will be reflected also in other countries. One more comment there.
Bonne année à tous. Happy New Year.
States and the private advisor of Mrs. Garcia, who's the CEO of Dignity Service. Nous avons lancé en 2019 une plateforme de...
In 2019, we launched a development progress, a development cooperation platform, and thank you to the ACP and the CTA for helping us to identify projects. With 5 billion from private funds, we're working in 4 territories: West Africa, East Africa, Southern Africa, and Central Africa. And quite naturally, I would like to say I am available here together with our German colleagues.
Together, also in priority on agriculture, we have started a first rice qualification project in West Africa, which is Sierra Leone. We have allocated an envelope of 250 million, which we are now finalizing with the protocol of the Ministry of Agriculture. We have been invited to analyze the agriculture opportunities in RDC, following the visit of the President Tshisekedi, where we develop agriculture development model province by province, to start with La Chopo, where we have allocated 100 million private funding for agriculture cooperation and development projects. We will then welcome the delegation of Madagascar, the President and the government, end of this month in private, following his visit here in Brussels. And my main objective is to tell you all, come and join us in doing that, bringing the best of European, including German entrepreneurs in supporting the renaissance of Africa, to start with agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you. There's in the very back. Yes.
Merci, Monsieur le Moderateur. Thank you, moderator. My name is Mr. Baruti. I'm an academic who works on peace building, but I also am involved in development cooperation. I don't have a question, but just something to say to my brothers Njai and the colleague from Europa. With regards to awareness building on agroecology, it's very good to work within a group and build on that group, but I think it's also very good to work with the media. It's important to negotiate with decision makers and governments so that public and private TV channels, etc., can continue to build awareness on these issues. Secondly, with regards to deforestation, Mr. Mansour, I think, should rest easy, because Abdoulaye Wade was saying that he had to cut down the trees to import rice. And France, negotiating, who was the intermediary with the Asian countries, was saying that they were asking for too much in terms of groundnuts. So President Wade himself acknowledged that. Now there should be a difference between West Africa and Central Africa. In West Africa, the rice is very helpful, but in Central Africa, this can be exported. Now, the states, if we were to export coal, for example, to countries in the Gulf, countries could get up to 100 million in tax receipts.
Je vais donner la parole à Monsieur Ndiaye.
Let me give the floor to Mr. Ndiaye and Mr. Koulibaly, who a lot of questions were for him.
Okay, I know we are pressed for time, but to answer Michel, and I stand to be corrected by the expert biologists in the room, we use those fertility trees, and these are trees that live in symbiosis at the level of their roots with bacteria. That's a description in a nutshell. So these are bacteria that derive what they need in the air, in the atmosphere, and they make it available in the soil, and it becomes something that the plants can use. It's simple as that. You know perfectly well, and that this is the second main requirement for plants in addition to water. So if you have such bacteria and mushrooms, then they can help in this respect. As for the media, you asked the right question at the right time. We recently broadcast a movie on RTBF at some point last month, and that was a film on our activities. This was made in Senegal and Togo, and the film was broadcast on the RTBF network. I have a few clips of the movie that I can share with some of you, just to give you an idea of what farmers feel about those fertility trees and the results that we obtain in some countries. So what we try to do is to disseminate what we're doing through the media, even though we wanted to do that at the right moment. So we have 1,500,000 such trees planted in the farmers' plots, but Togo's been implementing it since '92, and they've planted more than 30 million trees. Thank you. Just to add to what Mansour just said, it's extremely important to use media, and we do it with the means at our disposals. So we produce short movies, maybe half an hour, just to document practices and success stories on agroecology. But these are not usually broadcast on national TVs. That's the problem, because you have to pay to get your film broadcast, and it's very expensive. To get a half-hour slot on a TV channel in Africa costs a few million CFA francs. And it's the same with private TV stations, which is why we can't disseminate what we do more. Perhaps we could have a civil society or farmers' organizations TV one day. But for now, we try to use social media, we try to broadcast our videos and other communication tools. I mentioned coal earlier, and our region is very different from the Central African region, where there's still a great deal of forest land. We don't have enough trees in our region, and therefore making coal is a very serious problem. There's soil degradation because there are no trees anymore. And the fact that farmers often have to cut down trees to make wood coal and sell it, they can make it, but if they continue to do that, then the soil degradation will continue. In other regions, perhaps it's a different context. There may be timber trafficking. But what I find most painful in our region is to see that some farmers don't have the choice. They can only cut down trees and make charcoal and make a living from it. So to stop the effects of climate change, we need to support activities in that sense, whereas governments tend to act as though there was no problem. In the speeches, they talk about the need to restore ecosystems, fighting against climate change, but we don't invest in the poor, in the vulnerable groups who have no other way than chopping down trees. So that's the message I wanted to convey. Thank you.
Tadeo and Ellen want to add something very briefly. If not, I hand over to Mr. Hailu for concluding remarks.
Thank you very much, Emile. We're almost at 1, so that we don't have really much time. Just to say that this topic is extremely important, as we have seen this morning. We have seen the challenges that farmers are facing. I think we had excellent presentations from Ellen and others to clearly demonstrate that the conventional farming is not working for smallholder producers in Africa. And when you look at the big challenges of climate change, loss of biodiversity, and so on, that we need complete transformation of the food system. So I think that has been well established. And looking at agroecology, a number of issues came up in our discussions. Clearly, there is evidence to show that it's productive, it can work, it can compete with conventional farming practices, but I think there are clearly indication that it has to be context specific. We have to see how it works in different contexts. And there is a need in terms of policy, investment, legislation, and all kinds of support to mainstream agroecology, which doesn't seem to exist especially in developing countries. I think we had numerous examples where public extension systems, government policies, and investments are not supporting this whole approach to agroecology. So I think there is a real clear call for policy support from the donor community as well as from governments to try and mainstream agroecology and its different forms of application. We had some really good examples from agroforestry and other areas as well. And again, the issue of the challenge of transition, awareness at the public level as well as at the policy level. These were some of the issues that came up, and the need to co-create knowledge with farmers. I think we had really good examples of the participatory research and application that have been developed and that really engaged farmers and helped to move this agenda forward. So there are quite a number of really useful insights that we have heard from these presentations. Of course, in this kind of presentations, we always get the people who are already convinced. And I think also in the audience, many of us are convinced about the value of this. I think the challenge is how do you convince the skeptics? How do you convince the people who really make those decisions on investment and on enabling policies? So going forward, I think these are some of the issues that we should bring out. Earlier this morning, we heard about a number of big initiatives and policy processes that would encourage investment in agroecology, including the Green Deal of the EU and others, international processes, which I think will definitely generate opportunities in terms of investment, in terms of more research and education support in this area. So we had really excellent interaction. I just like to take this opportunity to thank our presenters, the chairs, Isolina chaired the first session, and Emil, for chairing those sessions, and also for the audience, for your active participation. I like, again, to thank my colleague Isolina and others in the Brussels office, who have been doing this excellent work, as you can imagine, have had a very positive feedback about the value of these briefings, and we very much thank the partners, the Commission, European Commission, DG DEVCO, ACP Secretariat, of course, giving us the facilities, and other partners as well. So we have been doing this for many, many years, since 2007. Unfortunately, we'll be bringing this to a close. We'll have one more briefing, which will be happening next month on the 26th of February. So that will be the last briefing that we have. But hopefully there will be other venues or opportunities to continue this extremely valuable briefing going forward. But we'll be having a formal, or at least a more focused way of celebrating the what has been achieved through the briefings and what we think would be the continuous, the future form of, at least maintaining that we have some possibility of, continuing the dialogue in the future in some other form. But at least as far as the briefing goes, the next one will be the last one. So we encourage you to join us. We'll be sending out announcements about what will be the topic. Initially, we are thinking of the future of farming, but we'll be doing more specific programming around that. So again, I'd like to thank everyone, the speakers and the participants, and I encourage you also to continue the discussions at the lunch break. Isolina, you want to say? Yes, Emil probably will say last word. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Henri, for these very excellent concluding remarks. I just want to give a takeaway message. We have heard the demand from farmers' organizations on what they want to see happening in the future, and that has not been listened to. We have heard about practical examples of what is possible to do, often with very little inputs, with very little resources. We've heard from the various presentations in this morning about the urgency and the importance of the challenges. And I think time is over to be questioning whether we should do this or that. There is very clear evidence on the way forward, and we should really go full steam ahead with us. And what we heard from Germany is very encouraging. We've heard other countries that are really embarking on that. That should really become the mainstream. And I think this opportunity this morning has been an excellent opportunity to show that we have gone a big step forward in moving in that direction. I want to thank CTA again for having facilitated this. Thank you.